My son-in-law pointed a manicured finger at my face and screamed, "You are a stain on this family. Ezekiel, pack your trash and get out of my sight." He threw my belongings onto the driveway while his wealthy friends laughed, holding their champagne flutes like weapons. I did not say a word. I did not beg, and I certainly did not cry. I just picked up my toolbox and walked into the night. 7 years later, I sat at the head of a mahogany conference table in the tallest building in Chicago as that same man walked in trembling to beg for a loan to save his dying company. When he saw who was holding the pen, his knees actually hit the floor. Before I tell you how I bought his dignity for $1, hit that like button and subscribe if you believe that karma always keeps receipts. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to rebuild your life from zero, because that is exactly where my story begins. My name is Ezekiel Robinson, but everyone calls me Zeke. I am 72 years old and my hands look like the roots of an old oak tree, gnarled and stained with the dark earth of 1,000 job sites. I spent 40 years as a soil engineer and a master carpenter fixing the foundations of houses that other architects gave up on. I know that a house is not held up by the walls or the roof. It is held up by the dirt underneath it. But my son-in-law Braden Cole never understood that Braden is a man who thinks the world is made of glass and steel and that anything with a little bit of dust on it is worthless. It was Braden's 32nd birthday. The party was being held at the estate I had given them. I bought the land 20 years ago when it was just a swampy lot nobody wanted. I drained it, I reinforced the soil, and I built the frame of that house with my own 2 hands. When my daughter Maya got married, I put the deed in both their names. It was my gift, my legacy. But to Braden, it was just a stage for his ego. I parked my rusted Ford truck around the back so I would not embarrass him. He had asked me to do that years ago, and I complied because I wanted peace for Maya. I walked around to the front entrance carrying my gift. It was a Japanese maple sapling, a rare breed I had been cultivating in the greenhouse behind the guest cottage where I lived. It was small and delicate, but in 10 years it would be a masterpiece of red and gold. It was a gift of time, and I thought maybe, just maybe, it would help him understand the value of patience. The front door was open, music pulsing from inside like a headache. Braden had invited the elite of the city, tech bros, real estate sharks, and women who looked like they were made of porcelain. I paused at the threshold, wiping my boots on the mat. I knew Braden hated dirt. I was wearing my best flannel shirt and clean overalls, but to people like them, I probably looked like the help. I stepped onto the white marble foyer. It was Italian marble. Calicotta gold. I remembered when Braden ordered it, ignoring my advice that it was too soft for a high traffic area. As I walked in, the heavy clay pot in my arms shifted slightly. I adjusted my grip and a small clump of dark, nutrient-rich soil spilled over the edge. It hit the pristine white floor with a soft thud, scuffing the polish. The music seemed to stop instantly. "What the hell are you doing?" Braden's voice cut through the chatter. He was standing at the top of the stairs holding a whiskey glass, looking like a king, addressing a peasant. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my truck, and his face was twisted in a look of pure disgust. I froze, looking down at the small pile of dirt. It was nothing. A quick sweep would fix it. But Braden descended the stairs like a storm. "I brought you a gift, Braden," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It is a maple. It symbolizes strength and endurance." Braden reached the bottom step. He didn't look at the tree. He looked at the floor. "You dirty old man," he hissed loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Look at my floor. This is $50,000 PUC, imported stone, and you are tracking mud all over it like a barn animal. It is just a little soil." "Braden, I can clean it up," I said, reaching into my pocket for a handkerchief. "Don't touch it," Braden screamed, knocking my hand away. "You will just smear it around. You are always doing this, Ezekiel. You walk around here in those disgusting clothes smelling like sawdust and fertilizer dragging down the property value. Do you know what my associates ask me? They ask me why I keep a homeless man in the backyard." The room was dead silent. My daughter Maya was standing near the kitchen holding a tray of appetizers. She looked down at her shoes, refusing to meet my eyes. That hurt more than anything. Braden could say. "I am not homeless, Braden," I said, standing a little taller. "I built this house. I fixed the foundation. When the north corner started to sink last winter. Remember?" Braden laughed, a cruel barking sound. Oh, here we go again with the foundation story. Nobody cares about the dirt, Ezekiel. We care about the aesthetic. And right now, you are ruining mine. He grabbed the pot from my hands. I thought he was going to take it, but instead he turned and hurled it out the open front door. It crashed onto the concrete driveway, shattering into 100 pieces. The dark soil scattered across the white pavement, and the delicate sapling lay broken, its roots exposed to the cold air. That is what I think of your gift, Braden spat. He turned back to me, his face red with a mix of alcohol and arrogance. And I am done pretending this works. I need that guest cottage. The Lamborghini is arriving next week, and I need a climate-controlled garage. I am tired of seeing your junk pile out my window. He stepped closer into my personal space. Pack your things. Ezekiel, tonight you are leaving. I blinked, trying to process the words. Leaving. Where would I go? I had sunk every penny of my savings into this property, into helping them set up Braden's business. This is my home, I said quietly. My name is on the history of this land. Your name is on nothing, Braden corrected, sneering. You signed the quitclaim deed 5 years ago, remember? To help us refinance. You have no rights here, you are a guest, and the guest has overstayed his welcome. He checked his gold Rolex as if bored. You have 1 hour, grab your clothes and get out. If you are not off the property by 9 o'clock, I am calling the police and having you removed for trespassing. And Ezekiel, take a shower before you go anywhere else. You smell like a grave. He turned his back on me and clapped his hands loudly. Okay, everyone, sorry for the interruption. Let's get the music back on. The trash is taking itself out. The music started again. The guests laughed, a nervous tittering sound, and went back to their drinks as if I had simply evaporated. I stood there for a moment, feeling the eyes of strangers burning into my back. I looked at Maya one last time, hoping she would step forward, hoping she would say something, anything to stop this. Maya looked up. Her eyes were wet, but she turned away, walking back into the kitchen to refill the tray. She chose him. She chose the comfort, the money, the illusion over her own father. I turned and walked out the door. I stepped over the broken remains of the maple tree. I bent down and picked up a small shard of the clay pot, putting it in my pocket. It was sharp, and it cut my finger, but I needed the pain. I needed to remember this moment. I walked to the guest cottage. It wasn't much, just a small one-bedroom structure I had built from reclaimed cedar, but it was mine. It smelled of wood shavings and linseed oil, the smells of honest work. I didn't have much to pack. I took my clothes, my work boots, and the few photos I had of my late wife, Clara. Then I went to the workbench. Underneath a loose floorboard was a metal box. It contained my life's work, not money, but knowledge, my journals, 40 years of notes on soil composition, drainage systems, and ancient carpentry techniques that nobody used anymore. Braden thought I was just a handyman. He didn't know I held patents for structural reinforcement that I had never bothered to monetize because I preferred the quiet life. I put the box in my truck. I walked out to the driveway. Braden was watching from the window, holding his whiskey glass, watching to make sure I left. I threw my bag into the bed of the Ford. The engine roared to life, a coughing, sputtering sound that made the valet parking the luxury cars sneer. I rolled down the window as I passed the front of the house. Braden came out onto the porch, smugness radiating off him in waves. "Where are you going to go, Ezekiel?" he shouted over the engine noise. "The shelter closes at 8. Better hurry, or you will be sleeping under a bridge where you belong." I looked at him. I looked at the house I had built, the house that was standing on soil I had stabilized. I am going to get some rest. "Braden," I said, my voice calm, surprisingly steady. "But you should be careful. This house is heavy, and the ground underneath it, well, it has memory." Braden laughed, waving me off. "Get out of here, you old fool." I drove down the long, winding driveway, past the manicured lawns and the iron gates. I didn't look back. I hit the main road, and the darkness swallowed me whole. I was 72 years old. I had $60 in my wallet and a tank of gas. I was homeless. I was humiliated. But as I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a man who had just been woken up from a long nap. Braden Cole had made a fatal mistake. He judged a tree by its bark, not its roots. He thought he had thrown away a piece of trash. He didn't know he had just released a wolf back into the wild. I drove toward the city lights in the distance. My hands were dirty. Yes, but dirty hands build empires, and tomorrow I was going to start building mine. The silence that followed Braden's explosion was absolute. It was not the quiet of peace, but the suffocating vacuum of a room where all the air had been sucked out. The music had stopped. The guests, people who held glasses of champagne worth more than my monthly pension, stared at me with a mixture of pity and revulsion. To them, I was not a father or a grandfather. I was a disruption. I was a stain on their perfect evening. But I did not look at them. I did not look at Braden, whose chest was heaving with the exertion of his rage. I looked at the one person in that room who mattered. I looked at Maya. My daughter was standing near the kitchen island, clutching a silver serving tray so hard her knuckles were white. She was wearing a dress I knew she couldn't afford, diamonds that I knew were bought on credit, and a smile that had long since shattered. I waited. I waited for her to step forward. I waited for the fire I knew she had in her blood. I remembered the little girl who once punched a boy in the 3rd grade for making fun of my work boots. I remembered the teenager who marched in protests and quoted Angela Davis at the dinner table. I waited for that Maya to throw the tray down and tell her husband that he could not speak to her father, the man who raised her alone after her mother died like a stray dog. I locked eyes with her. "Maya," I said softly. My voice was calm, but it carried across the marble floor. She looked up. For a second, just a split second, I saw the flash of anger in her eyes. I saw the daughter I raised, but then she looked at Braden. She saw the purple vein throbbing in his forehead. She saw the way his hand was clenched into a fist at his side, and just like a candle being blown out, the light in her eyes died. She looked down at her expensive heels. She took a breath that shuddered through her thin frame. "Daddy," she whispered. Her voice was so small I almost couldn't hear it over the ringing in my ears. "Please. He is under a lot of pressure right now. The market is volatile. He is just stressed." She paused, biting her lip, refusing to look at me again. Maybe it is better if you go, just for a while, until he calms down. You know how he gets about the house." The words hit me harder than the clay pot Braden had smashed. It wasn't the eviction that broke my heart, it was the justification. She wasn't just letting him do it. She was excusing it. She was taking the abuse and repackaging it as stress to make it swallowable. In that moment, I realized I hadn't just lost my home. I had lost my daughter to a man who had hollowed her out from the inside. I nodded slowly. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. There is no point in shouting at a person who has chosen to be deaf. "I understand, Maya," I said. I turned my back on them. I walked out the front door past the shattered remains of the Japanese maple. I crushed a leaf under my boot. It was green and alive 5 minutes ago. Now it was just debris. I walked across the lawn in the dark. The guest house was 200 yards away, nestled in a grove of oak trees I had preserved when we cleared the land. It was a simple structure, reclaimed wood and stone built with my own hands. It was the only place on this estate that felt real. I opened the door and turned on the single yellow lamp. I didn't look at the bed where I slept. I didn't look at the small kitchenette where I made my coffee every morning. I knew Braden wasn't bluffing. If I wasn't gone in an hour, he would call the police. And Braden had friends in the precinct. He would love nothing more than to see Ezekiel Robinson dragged off in handcuffs. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet. I didn't pack my clothes. I didn't pack the few shirts I owned or my good Sunday suit. Those things were replaceable. Fabric rots, cotton tears. I walked over to the corner of the room to the heavy workbench I had built from a solid slab of walnut. I knelt down and pried up a loose floorboard. Underneath, nestled in the insulation, was a battered gray metal lockbox. It was dented and scratched, covered in stickers from job sites I had worked on in the 80s and 90s. I pulled it out. It was heavy. This box didn't contain money. Braden had drained my savings years ago with his investment opportunities that never paid out. No, this box contained something far more valuable, though Braden was too stupid to see it. Inside were 30 journals, moleskin notebooks filled with my handwriting. They contained 40 years of soil analysis. They contained the chemical formulas for a compound I had developed to stabilize clay-heavy soil, the kind of soil that makes houses in this region crack and sink. They contained detailed blueprints of structural reinforcements that I had never published, trade secrets I kept in my head and on these pages. There was also a patent, U.S. patent, number 889021. Method for subsurface hydrostatic pressure relief.
subtle initiation.
I had filed it 10 years ago and forgotten about it. It was a technique for diverting underground water flow without using pumps. This box was my brain. It was my history. I put the box in the duffel bag. Then I grabbed my favorite chisel, the one with the handle worn smooth by my thumb, and a photo of Clara. That was it. I zipped the bag. I left the furniture. I left the dishes. I left the life I had tried to build in the shadow of my son-in-law's ego. I walked out of the guest house for the last time. The party at the main house was back in full swing. I could hear the bass of the music thumping through the night air. They had already forgotten me. I threw the bag into the back of my old Ford F-150. The truck was 20 years old, rusted around the wheel wells, but the engine was solid. I had rebuilt it myself. As I opened the driver's side door, a shadow fell across me. I turned around. Braden was standing there. He had come out the back door, a fresh drink in his hand, a smug grin plastered on his face. He was swaying slightly. Leaving so soon, he slurred, mocking me. "I thought you might put up a fight. I was looking forward to watching the security guards toss you over the gate." I looked at him. He looked soft. His hands were smooth. His suit was pristine. He stood on the ground, but he had no connection to it. "I am going, Braden," I said. He laughed, taking a sip of his bourbon. "Good. And don't think about coming back to beg Maya for money. I cut off her access to the joint account an hour ago, just in case she got sentimental. You are on your own, old man." He kicked the tire of my truck. "And don't forget your trash," he said, gesturing to the duffel bag in the truck bed. "Although honestly, everything you own is trash. You are obsolete, Ezekiel. You are like a rotary phone in a smartphone world. Useless." I climbed into the truck. I started the engine. It roared to life, a deep, throaty growl that drowned out the techno music from the house. I rolled down the window and looked Braden dead in the eye. "You think the world is built on steel and glass, Braden," I said. "You think it is built on credit scores and handshakes." Braden rolled his eyes. "Save the philosophy lesson for the homeless shelter." I shifted the truck into gear. "But you are wrong," I continued, my voice dropping an octave. "The world is built on dirt. It is built on what is underneath." I pointed a calloused finger at the massive illuminated mansion behind him, the house that was glowing like a spaceship in the night. "That house stands because of me, Braden. I stabilized the sinkhole it sits on. I diverted the water table. I anchored the pylons." Braden sneered. Yeah, you did your job. You got paid. Now get lost." I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I did the job I agreed. But the thing about dirt, Braden, is that it moves. If you don't respect it, it moves. Remember that when the rains come. I didn't wait for his response. I pulled out of the driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires. I watched him in the rearview mirror, a small, arrogant figure shrinking into the darkness. He took a sip of his drink and turned back to his party, confident that he had won. He thought he had just taken out the trash. He didn't realize he had just removed the only thing holding his castle together. I turned onto the main highway. The road was empty. I had no home. I had no family. I was 72 years old and I was driving into the void. But as I touched the metal box inside the bag next to me, I felt a strange sense of calm. Braden had money. He had power. But he was building on sand. I had the bedrock. And it was time to remind the world that you cannot build a kingdom if you kill the king who knows the land. I drove toward the horizon, leaving the estate behind. The first drop of rain hit my windshield. It was starting. The parking lot of a 24-hour Walmart is a strange place at 2 a.m. It is a purgatory of asphalt and sodium lights where the unwanted and the lost drift like ghosts. I parked my Ford F-150 in the furthest corner away from the entrance under a flickering lamppost that buzzed like an angry hornet. The rain had stopped, but the dampness had seeped into everything. It was in the upholstery of the truck, it was in my clothes, and it was deep in my joints. I climbed into the bed of the truck. I had a camper shell, so I was dry, but the steel floor was unforgiving. I laid out a sleeping bag I had used for camping trips 30 years ago. It smelled of mildew and old memories. I curled up, trying to find a position that didn't make my 72-year-old back scream in protest. I lay there staring at the fiberglass roof of the camper shell, listening to the distant hum of the highway. I closed my eyes, but sleep was impossible. Every time I drifted off, I saw the signature. That damned signature. My mind replayed the memory not of tonight, but of a day 5 years ago. It was a sunny afternoon in the lawyer's office. The air conditioning was humming. Maya was sitting next to Braden, holding his hand. She looked so happy, so full of hope. Braden was wearing a blue suit, smiling that shark smile of his. The lawyer had put the deed to the estate on the table. The land I had bought with sweat and blood. The land I had drained and leveled with my own hands. I bought that land when it was nothing but a mosquito-infested swamp because I saw the potential. I saw a place where my grandchildren could run. I saw a legacy. And then I did the stupidest thing a father can do. I let tradition blind me. I remembered the lawyer asking Mr. Robinson, "Are you sure you want to include Mr. Cole on the title as a joint tenant with rights of survivorship?" I looked at Maya. I wanted her to be secure. I wanted her husband to feel like a man, like a provider, even though he hadn't put a dime into the property. I wanted to buy his loyalty with equity. So I said yes. I picked up that heavy, expensive pen, and I signed away my life. I watched Braden sign next to me. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look grateful. He looked hungry. He signed his name with a flourish, claiming half of my sweat, half of my history with a flick of his wrist. I groaned in the darkness of the truck bed, turning over on the hard metal. I was not just homeless because of him. I was homeless because of me. I was the architect of my own destruction. I had built the house, and then I handed the keys to the arsonist. A security guard vehicle rolled by slowly, its yellow lights flashing. I held my breath, lying perfectly still, praying he wouldn't knock, praying he wouldn't shine a flashlight in my face and tell me to move along. I was Ezekiel Robinson. I was a master craftsman. I was a respected man in my community. And now I was hiding in a truck bed, afraid of a rent-a-cop. The shame was a physical weight on my chest, heavier than any beam I had ever lifted. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes, the sky was turning a bruised purple. The sun was coming up. My body was stiff. My hands ached. I sat up and rubbed my face. My beard felt rough. I looked at the duffel bag in the corner. The metal box was inside. I needed coffee. I needed a plan. I couldn't stay here. I climbed out of the truck and walked into the Walmart. The greeter looked at me with suspicion. I walked straight to the bathroom. I washed my face in the sink using the harsh pink soap that smelled like industrial cleaner. I looked in the mirror. My eyes were red-rimmed. My gray hair was matted. I looked like exactly what Braden said I was. Trash. I bought a cheap cup of coffee from the vending machine and walked back to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat and pulled out my phone. It was an old model screen cracked in the corner. I scrolled through my contacts. Most of the names were people who were dead or retired. The world I knew had moved on. Then my thumb hovered over a name. Marcus King. I hadn't spoken to Marcus in 10 years. He was just a kid from the South Side when I met him. Skinny, angry, and brilliant. He had come to work for me as a laborer one summer. Most kids quit after a week of digging trenches. Marcus stayed. He asked questions. He wanted to know why I mixed ash with the clay. He wanted to know why I used oak instead of pine for the pilings. I taught him everything I knew. I taught him how to listen to the wood. I taught him that a building breathes. He went to architecture school on a scholarship I helped him get. He moved to Chicago. I heard he made it big. Designing skyscrapers, winning awards. Would he even remember me, or would he be like Braden, embarrassed to know the old man with the dirty hands? I hesitated. My pride told me to put the phone away. My pride told me to go find a day labor job and rent a cheap motel. But then I remembered Braden's face. I remembered him calling me obsolete. I pressed the call button. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up. "Hello?" The voice was deep, professional, hurried. "Marcus," I said. My voice was rusty. "It is Ezekiel. Ezekiel Robinson." There was a silence on the other end, a long pause. My heart sank. He didn't want to talk to me. "Master Robinson." The voice had changed. The hurry was gone, replaced by something warm, something respectful. "Is that really you?" Marcus asked. "I was just thinking about you last week. I was looking at a truss design and thinking Zeke would hate this. It has no soul." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. A tear leaked out of my eye, and I brushed it away angrily. "I am glad you remember the lessons, son," I said. "How are you?" "Master Robinson, are you still in Georgia? How is the family?" I looked out the window at the Walmart parking lot. I saw a shopping cart abandoned in a puddle. "The family is complicated, Marcus. And I am not in Georgia anymore." "Well, I am, but I am leaving." "You are leaving?" Marcus sounded surprised. You said you would never leave that land. You said your roots were too deep. Some roots get rot, Marcus, I said, my voice hardening. And sometimes you have to pull them up before they kill the tree. I paused. I needed to ask, but I couldn't beg. I need work, Marcus. I am not asking for a handout. I still have my hands. I still have my tools. But I need a project. Something far away from here. Marcus didn't answer immediately. I could hear him shifting papers in the background. It is funny you called today, Zeke, he said slowly. Fate has a sense of humor. What do you mean? I am working on a restoration project here in Chicago, Marcus said. The Vanderhoven Estate. It is a historic landmark, built in 1890. The foundation is limestone, but it is sitting on a wetland. The city wants to condemn it. They say it is sinking. I listened. My engineer's brain started to wake up. Limestone on wetland. The water was wicking up into the stone, causing it to crumble. They want to use concrete injection, I guessed. Exactly, Marcus said. But you know what that will do? It will crack the limestone, I said instantly. The concrete is too rigid. The house needs to breathe. You need to treat the soil, not the stone. You need to change the hydrostatic pressure. Silence again. Then I heard Marcus chuckle. God, I missed you, Zeke. Look, every contractor in this city is telling me to pour concrete. I have been fighting them for months. I told the owners there is an old method, a chemical stabilization technique combined with timber shoring, but nobody here knows how to do it. They say it is lost technology. It isn't lost, I said, glancing at the duffel bag in the seat next to me. It is in my passenger seat. You have the formula, Marcus asked, his voice rising with excitement. The one you used on the River Bridge project in '92. I have the formula, I have the schematics, and I have the hands to do it. Master Robinson, Marcus said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. If you can get to Chicago, I don't just have a job for you. I have a crisis that only you can solve. The pay is, well, let's just say it is substantial. But more importantly, I need someone who knows what they are doing. When can you be here? I started the engine of the Ford. The vibration felt good. It felt like purpose. I am 72, Marcus. I don't drive as fast as I used to, but I am leaving now. Just get here safely, Zeke. And Zeke. Yeah, I am sorry about whatever happened down there, but their loss is my gain. The Vanderhoven house has been waiting for you. I hung up the phone. I put the truck in gear. I drove out of the Walmart parking lot, leaving the ghosts behind. I drove past the exit for Braden's estate. I didn't look at it. I wasn't a homeless old man anymore. I was a master craftsman on his way to a job site. Chicago was 800 miles away. 800 miles to think. 800 miles to plan. Braden thought he had buried me. He forgot that I was a seed. And now, thanks to the rain he forced me into, I was about to grow into something he couldn't cut down. I merged onto the interstate heading north. The sun was fully up now, shining on the road ahead. Let them keep the marble floors, I thought. I am going to save a castle. Chicago is a city of broad shoulders and biting winds. I arrived there in my battered Ford truck with nothing but a duffel bag of tools and a heart full of cold determination. I was 72 years old. Most men my age were playing shuffleboard in Florida or bouncing grandchildren on their knees. I was walking onto a construction site in the middle of winter looking for a way to prove that I wasn't dead yet. Marcus met me at the gate of the Vanderhoven estate. It was a magnificent old beast of a house, a Gothic revival mansion that looked like it was screaming silently as it sank into the marshy ground near the lake. The stone was cracking, the porches were listing. It was dying. Surrounding Marcus were 3 men in white hard hats and clean orange vests. Engineers, consultants, men who looked at a spreadsheet more often than they looked at the soil. They stared at me as I climbed out of my truck. They saw my gray beard. They saw my stained Carhartt jacket. They saw a relic. "This is your specialist," one of them asked, smirking. "He looks like he got lost on the way to the hardware store." Marcus stepped forward, his face hard. "This is Ezekiel Robinson, and he has forgotten more about structural integrity than you will ever learn in a classroom." I didn't say a word. Bull. I walked past them to the edge of the foundation. I knelt down in the mud. I didn't use a laser level. I didn't use a moisture meter. I took off my glove and pressed my bare hand against the wet limestone. I closed my eyes. I could feel the vibration of the nearby traffic. I could feel the cold seep of the water table rising and falling. The house is thirsty, I said, standing up and wiping the mud on my pants. You are trying to plug the cracks with concrete, but the house is drinking the water from the soil because the clay has dried out deep down. You need to rehydrate the clay bed and shore it up with white oak timbers treated in saline. The lead engineer laughed. Rehydrate the clay. That is voodoo science. We need steel piles. We need to drive 50 feet of steel into the ground. If you drive steel into this ground, I said calmly, looking him in the eye, the vibration will shatter the limestone foundation in 3 days. The house will collapse before you finish the first pile. They argued, they scoffed, but Marcus was the lead architect. He put his reputation on the line. Do it your way, Zeke, he said. For the next 6 months, I worked like a man possessed. I was the first one on site at 4 a.m. and the last one to leave when the sun went down. I didn't just supervise, I dug. I mixed the chemical compound I had invented in my backyard, a mixture of lime ash and a polymer that expanded when it hit water, locking the soil in place without being rigid. The young laborers watched me at first with skepticism, then with respect, and finally with awe. They saw an old man who could swing a sledgehammer without breaking a sweat. They saw me climbing the scaffolding with the agility of a man half my age. I wasn't working for money, I was working for redemption. Every crack I filled, every beam I stabilized was a piece of my own dignity I was reclaiming. And it worked. 3 months in, the sinking stopped. The laser measurements showed the house had stabilized to within a millimeter. The cracks stopped spreading. The house could breathe again. The owners, a wealthy couple who had been ready to tear it down, came to the site and shook my hand with tears in their eyes. They wrote me a check that was bigger than my pension for 5 years. I didn't spend it. I put it in the bank. I was building a war chest. But while I was saving a foundation in Chicago, Braden was busy destroying one in Georgia. I didn't know the details until much later when I hired a private investigator to track the demise of my former estate. But I can see it in my mind as clearly as if I was standing there. It was a Tuesday, the same Tuesday I laid the first white oak beam in Chicago. Braden had hired a discount demolition crew to tear down my guest cottage. He was in a rush. He had ordered a custom Italian lift for his new Lamborghini, and he needed the garage built yesterday. The foreman of the crew, a man named Miller, had looked at the site plans and frowned. Mr. Cole Miller had said, wiping sweat from his brow. We did a ground scan. There is a lot of water movement under this cottage. The old man, Mr. Robinson, he built this cottage on a floating slab for a reason. If we dig down for your hydraulic lift, we might hit the aquifer. Braden was standing on the porch of the main house drinking his morning kale smoothie, wearing his noise-canceling headphones around his neck. I don't pay you to tell me about water, Miller, Braden snapped. I pay you to dig. That cottage is an eyesore. Tear it down, dig the pit, and have the concrete poured by Friday. I have a photo shoot scheduled for the car next week. Miller hesitated. Sir, if we hit a vein, the water could back up. It could undermine the main house. Braden laughed. That is impossible. The main house is a fortress. Just do your job. Or I will find a crew that isn't afraid of a little mud. So they dug. The excavator roared its metal teeth, tearing into the wood of the home I had built. I imagined the sound of the cedar splintering sounded like bones breaking. They crushed the roof. They smashed the workbench where I had taught Maya how to use a hammer. They scooped up the debris and dumped it into trucks like garbage. Then they started on the pit. They dug down 6 feet for the hydraulic lift mechanism. The soil was dark and wet. Miller was nervous. He kept watching the walls of the pit. Then at 8 feet, they hit it. It wasn't a geyser. It wasn't a dramatic explosion of water. It was a bleed. A dark, steady ooze of water began to seep into the bottom of the pit. It was the underground vein I had carefully diverted 20 years ago, using a system of French drains and clay barriers. By digging blindly, Braden had severed the artery. Water, a worker shouted. We got water rising. Miller ran to the edge. The pit was filling up fast. It was murky, silty water. Stop digging, Miller yelled. We need to pump this out and seal it. Braden came running out in his designer loafers. Why did you stop? He screamed. We hit a vein, Mr. Cole Miller said. We can't pour concrete in this. We need to bring in pumps. We need to reroute the flow. It might take 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Braden's face turned purple. I don't have 2 weeks. Just pour the concrete. You can't pour concrete in standing water, sir. It won't cure properly. Use the quick-dry stuff. Use the chemicals. Just bury it. Braden yelled, his voice echoing off the facade of the mansion. "If I don't have this garage ready for the magazine shoot, I lose the cover. Do you understand? Bury it." Miller looked at the water rising. He looked at the check Braden was waving. He was a contractor with bills to pay. He swallowed his conscience. "Pour it," he ordered his men. They backed the cement trucks up. They poured tons of gray sludge right on top of the bleeding vein. They buried the water. They capped it with a smooth, polished concrete floor. It looked perfect. It looked pristine. Braden stood on the new floor 3 days later, beaming. He parked his bright yellow Lamborghini on the lift. He took selfies. He posted them on Instagram with the caption, "Out with the old, in with the new." Progress. He didn't hear the sound underneath his feet. He didn't hear the water. You see, water is patient. You can't kill it. You can't bury it. If you block it in one place, it goes somewhere else. Braden had blocked the release valve I had built. The pressure had to go somewhere. It began to move sideways. It began to push against the clay soil that held up the main house. It began to search for a weakness in the limestone I had reinforced so many years ago. While Braden was celebrating his new garage, the water was quietly and visibly eating away at the ground beneath his feet. Back in Chicago, I woke up in the middle of the night with a start. I was sweating. I had a feeling, a deep, intuitive lurch in my stomach. It was the feeling a captain gets when the ship hits an iceberg long before the water reaches the deck. I sat up in my small, rented apartment. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. "You fool," I whispered into the darkness, thinking of Braden. "You arrogant fool." I didn't know exactly what he had done yet, but I knew the earth, and I knew that you cannot fight nature and win. I went back to my desk. I opened my laptop. I started searching for companies that bought distressed debt. I started looking for land deeds adjacent to my old property. I wasn't just fixing a house in Chicago anymore. I was preparing to buy a graveyard in Georgia. I worked harder. I took on a second project, then a third. My reputation grew. The Wizard of Clay, they called me. I saved a bridge in Detroit. I saved a historic church in Boston. The checks kept coming. 7 years. It takes 7 years for a Japanese maple to reach maturity, and it takes 7 years for water to rot a foundation completely from the inside out. I was patient. I waited. And then one day the phone rang. It wasn't Marcus. It was my private investigator. "Mr. Robinson," he said. "You might want to sit down. The bank just put a watch on the Cole estate, and there is a report of a crack in the north wall, a big one." I didn't sit down. I stood up. I walked to the mirror and looked at my reflection. The tired, homeless old man was gone. In his place was a man with a plan. "It is time," I said. I packed my bag, not the duffel bag this time, a leather briefcase. I was going home, not to fix the house, but to collect the debris. 7 years is a long time. It is long enough for a child to learn to read. It is long enough for a cell in your body to be replaced by a new one. And it is long enough for a lie to rot a foundation from the inside out. For me, those 7 years were a rebirth. I lived simply in a small apartment on the north side of Chicago, but my life was anything but small. Marcus and I had turned his firm into a powerhouse. We rebranded as ZMR Solutions, Zeke Marcus Restoration. We became the people you called when the skyscrapers stopped swaying correctly in the wind. We became the last line of defense before a building was condemned. I was 79 years old, but I felt 40. My hands were still rough, my back still ached when it rained, but my mind was sharper than ever. I had patents now, real ones. The Robinson stabilizer was an industry standard for chemical soil treatment. The checks that came in every month were substantial. I had enough money to buy Braden's precious Lamborghini fleet 10 times over, but nobody knew it. To the world, I was still just Zeke, the old guy in the Carhartt overalls who smelled like sawdust and drove a 20-year-old Ford truck. I didn't buy suits. I didn't buy watches. I invested. I bought land. Specifically, I bought land in Georgia. I bought the marshland south of my old estate. I bought the timber forest to the north, and through a shell company called Clara Holdings, named after my late wife, I bought the vacant commercial lot directly adjacent to Braden's property. Lot number 4. I was surrounding him. I was the water rising around his island, and he didn't even know his feet were wet. Every night I sat at my kitchen table in Chicago and read the reports from my private investigator. Report Year 3. Braden Cole files for a second mortgage. Interest rate prime +4. Reason liquidity issues at Cole Luxury Living. Report Year 5. Maya Cole is treated for anxiety. Credit cards declined at Saks Fifth Avenue. Report Year 7. The big one. I held the file in my hands. It included photographs taken by a drone. The estate my masterpiece was dying. From the air you could see it. The roofline of the main house was no longer straight. It had a subtle, sickening sag in the middle. The beautiful marble patio where Braden had humiliated me was cracked. A fissure ran right through the center, jagged like a lightning bolt. The report detailed the damage. The north corner of the house had sunk 4 inches in the last 6 months. Doors wouldn't close. Windows were popping out of their frames. The driveway, the one built over the water vane, had heaved and buckled, looking like a wave frozen in concrete. Braden was panicked. I knew it. The investigator's notes confirmed it. He had fired 3 contractors in the last month. They all told him the same thing. The foundation is compromised. The soil is liquefied. You need to stabilize the bedrock. But Braden couldn't afford stabilization. He was broke. His luxury living brand was a sham. He had leveraged everything on the next big project, a high-rise condo complex he planned to build by combining his estate with lot number 4. He needed to sell the house to fund the condo project, but nobody buys a sinking ship. I put down the report and picked up my coffee. It was black, bitter, and hot, just how I liked it. My phone rang. It was Marcus. "Zeke," he said, his voice tight. "We just got a call from Georgia. A developer named Braden Cole. He wants to hire ZMR Solutions. He says his house has a minor settling issue, and he needs a certification letter so he can sell it." I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled in a week. "He called us," I asked. "He called the firm Marcus corrected. He doesn't know you are the Z in ZMR. He thinks we are just high-priced consultants from Chicago. He offered double our rate for a rush job. He sounds desperate, Zeke. He said if he doesn't get the certification by Friday, the bank is going to foreclose." I leaned back in my chair. The springs creaked. "Don't take the job, Marcus." What Marcus asked. "Zeke, this is it. This is the moment. We can go down there, you can walk in, and you can tell him to his face that his house is falling down because of him." "No," I said. "That is too easy. If we take the job, we fix the house. We save him." "I don't want to save him, Marcus. I want to buy him." I paused, letting the plan form in my mind. It had been brewing for 7 years like a fine wine. "Tell him we are booked," I said. "Tell him we are too busy fixing real problems to deal with residential settling. But tell him you heard a rumor." "What rumor?" "Tell him you heard that Clara Holdings, the company that owns the lot next door, might be interested in buying his property as a teardown." Marcus was silent for a moment. Then he laughed. A low, wicked laugh. "A teardown. You want him to sell his $50 million estate as a teardown? If the foundation is bad, that is all it is worth, Marcus. The land is valuable. The house is just debris. Tell him Clara Holdings is looking to expand. Tell him they have deep pockets." I hung up the phone. I walked over to the window. Outside, the Chicago wind was howling. But in my mind, I was back in Georgia. I was standing in the mud, smelling the rain. Braden was trapped. He couldn't fix the house because he had no money. He couldn't sell the house because it was broken. His only way out was to sell the land to the mysterious neighbor who owned lot number 4. He didn't know that the neighbor was the man he had called trash. I went to my closet. I pushed aside the overalls and the flannel shirts. In the back, covered in plastic, was a suit. It was a custom-made Italian wool suit, charcoal gray. I had bought it 3 years ago for an award ceremony I never attended. I pulled it out. I brushed a speck of dust off the shoulder. I packed my bag. This time I didn't pack tools. I packed a pen. A very expensive gold-plated fountain pen. I drove my truck to the airport. I parked it in long-term parking. I walked into the terminal and bought a first-class ticket to Atlanta. When I sat down in the wide leather seat of the plane, the flight attendant asked me if I wanted a drink. "Champagne," I said. She looked at my calloused hands, my weathered face, and hesitated for a second. "Celebrating something, sir?" she asked, pouring the bubbles. I took the glass. I looked at the golden liquid. It reminded me of the night I left. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "I am celebrating a homecoming." The plane took off banking south. I watched the city disappear beneath the clouds. I was coming for you, Braden, and I was bringing the storm with me. Braden Cole was drowning not in water but in debt, and the funny thing about drowning men is that they do not see reality. They only see survival. He did not see that the ground beneath his feet was shifting. He only saw the red ink on his balance sheet. My private investigator sent me the financials, and they were a masterpiece of mismanagement. Braden had leveraged the estate to the hilt to fund a failed venture in cryptocurrency, and now, with the mansion literally cracking in half, he was facing total ruin. The bank had given him 30 days to come up with $2 million, or they would foreclose and seize everything, including his reputation. I sat in my office in Chicago watching the drone feed of my old property. The grass was overgrown, the fountain was dry, but Braden was pacing the cracked patio, talking animatedly on his phone. I zoomed in. He was pointing at the woods to the north. He was pointing at lot number 4. I knew exactly what he was thinking because desperate men are predictable. He couldn't sell the house as a residence because of the foundation damage, so he had concocted a new plan, a grand illusion. He was going to rezone the entire property. He was going to tear down the mansion and build a high-density luxury condominium complex called the Cole Towers. It was a fantasy, of course. You cannot build a tower on liquefying soil. But Braden didn't care about physics. He only cared about the pitch deck. He needed a project to sell to investors to get the cash to pay off the bank. But there was one problem, one snag in his grand design access. The estate was landlocked by a protected wetland on one side and a steep ridge on the other. The only way to get heavy construction equipment and the only way to build a road wide enough for a condo complex was through the adjacent property. Lot number 4. Lot number 4 was an ugly patch of scrub brush and old pine trees that had sat vacant for decades. Braden had ignored it for years, calling it an eyesore, but now it was his lifeline. Without that land, he couldn't get the zoning permits. Without the permits, he couldn't get the investors. And without the investors, he was finished. I watched him pull up the county tax records on his iPad. I could almost see the gears turning in his head. He was looking for the owner. He expected to find some old widow or a defunct trust that he could bully into selling for pennies. He found the name Clara Holdings, LLC. I saw him pause. He frowned. He typed the name into a search engine. My heart skipped a beat, not out of fear but out of a cold, hard anger. Clara. That was my wife's name, Maya's mother. The woman who had cooked Braden dinner every Sunday for 3 years. The woman whose picture sat on the mantelpiece of the house he now occupied. But Braden didn't recognize it. He didn't make the connection. To him, Clara was just a word, a collection of letters, a corporate entity standing in the way of his salvation. He had never cared enough about my family to remember my dead wife's name. He had looked at her photo 1,000 times and never truly seen her. He dialed the number listed for Clara Holdings. The phone on the desk in front of me did not ring. Instead, the call was routed to a burner phone sitting on the desk of my head of legal. Marcus was in the office next door watching the same video feed. He looked at me through the glass partition and winked. Then he picked up the phone, putting on his most professional, detached lawyer voice. Clara Holdings, Marcus said softly into the receiver. How may I direct your call? I picked up my extension and listened in silent, invisible. Yes, this is Braden Cole, CEO of Cole Luxury Living. I am calling regarding the property located at 4400 River Road, lot number 4. I would like to speak to the owner regarding an acquisition. I listened to his voice. It was smooth, practiced. It had that fake warmth of a salesman trying to sell you a car with a blown transmission. He sounded confident, but I could hear the tremor underneath. He was terrified. I am afraid the owner is a very private individual, Mr. Cole, Marcus replied coolly. He does not take unsolicited calls. If you wish to make an offer, you can submit it in writing to our Chicago office. Braden laughed, a nervous sound. Listen, I don't think you understand who I am. I own the adjacent estate. We are planning a major development that will significantly increase property values in the area. I am prepared to offer your client a very generous sum for that useless patch of dirt. Useless, Marcus repeated, letting the word hang in the air. My client considers that land a long-term investment. Mr. Cole, he is in no rush to sell. Braden's voice tightened. Look, let's cut the games. I know it is just a shell company. I am offering $50,000 cash. Fast closing, that is double the assessed value. You would be fools to walk away $50,000. It was an insult. It wouldn't even cover the cost of the timber I had planted there. But Braden thought he was being generous, thought he was the shark in the tank. I signaled to Marcus. I held up one finger, then pointed to the calendar. My client is not interested in cash, Marcus said calmly. He is a strategic investor. However, he is looking for partners for a joint venture. If your development is as promising as you say, perhaps there is room for a discussion. A joint venture. Braden paused. I could hear him calculating. If he brought in a partner, he would have to share the profits. But if he got lot number 4, he could save his skin. He could tell the bank he had secured the land. He could spin it. I am listening, Braden said. The owner will be in Chicago next week. Marcus lied. He has a gap in his schedule on Tuesday morning. If you can be here with your proposal and your architectural plans, he might give you 15 minutes. But be warned, Mr. Cole, he is a very busy man. He does not tolerate wasted time. Chicago. Braden hesitated. That is short notice. I have a very full calendar. He was lying. He had nothing on his calendar but meetings with bankruptcy lawyers, but he had to maintain the illusion of importance. I can move some things around, Braden said finally. Tuesday works. What time? 9 a.m. sharp. The ZMR Tower, 40th floor. Don't be late. Marcus hung up the phone. I sat back in my chair, letting out a long, slow breath. The trap was set. Braden was coming to Chicago. He was going to spend money he didn't have on a plane ticket. He couldn't afford to pitch a project that was physically impossible to a man he thought was a stranger. I looked at the photo of Clara on my desk. He didn't remember your name, honey, I whispered, touching the glass frame. But he is going to learn it soon. He is going to write it on a check. He can't cash. The next few days were a blur of preparation. I didn't want this to be just a meeting. I wanted it to be theater. I wanted Braden to walk into a world he aspired to, but could never reach. We prepared. The conference room. It was a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. It screamed power. It screamed old money, the kind of money Braden pretended to have, but I actually possessed. I instructed the staff. I told the receptionist exactly how to greet him. I told the security guards to make him wait in the lobby for exactly 20 minutes. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to feel small before he even stepped into the elevator. I went to the tailor. I had my suit pressed. I bought a new pair of shoes, handmade Italian leather. Not because I cared about fashion, but because I knew Braden did. He judged a man by his shoes. 7 years ago, he had judged my work boots. Now let him judge these. On Monday night, the night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I stood on the balcony of my apartment, looking out at the city lights. I thought about Maya. I wondered if she knew what he was doing. I wondered if she knew he was selling off the last pieces of our life to chase a phantom. I felt a pang of guilt. Was I being too harsh? Was I letting vengeance cloud my judgment? But then I remembered the way he had thrown my Japanese maple onto the driveway, the way he had called me trash, the way he had erased me from my own home. He didn't just hurt me. He corrupted my daughter. He destroyed the land. He was a blight, and you don't negotiate with a blight. You remove it. Tuesday morning dawned cold and gray. A typical Chicago winter day. The wind whipped off the lake, carrying a bite of frost. I arrived at the office at 6 a.m. I sat in the big leather chair at the head of the conference table. I swiveled it around so my back was to the door. I practiced my lines in my head. At 8:45, the intercom buzzed. "Mr. Cole is here, sir," the receptionist said. "He is early." "Let him wait," I said. "Don't offer him coffee. Let him sit." I waited. I watched the clock on the wall tick. The seconds felt like hours. I imagined him downstairs adjusting his tie, checking his reflection in the glass, rehearsing his pitch. He probably thought he was walking into a room with some old billionaire he could charm. He probably thought he was going to walk out with a deal that would save his life. He had no idea that he was walking into a courtroom, and the judge, jury, and executioner was the man who used to fix his leaky faucets at 9:15. Exactly. I pressed the button. Send him up. I heard the elevator ding down the hall. I heard the heavy footsteps on the plush carpet. Confident hurried. I heard Marcus greet him. "Mr. Cole, right this way. The chairman is waiting." The door to the conference room opened. I didn't turn around. I kept my chair facing the window, staring out at the gray horizon. I wanted him to see the back of the chair first. I wanted him to see the suit. The silhouette of power. "Good morning, sir." Braden's voice rang out, eager, desperate, overly loud. "It is an honor to meet you. I have brought the plans for the Cole Towers. It is going to be a landmark development." I didn't speak, I just sat there, listening to his breath, listening to the rustle of his papers. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, until he started to fidget. Sir Braden asked, his voice faltering slightly, Is everything all right?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small pocket knife, an old buck knife with a wooden handle. The same knife I used to whittle wood on the porch of the guest cottage. I opened the blade with a click. Then slowly, deliberately, I spun the chair around. The look on his face was worth every second of the last 7 years. It wasn't just shock, it was a total system failure. His brain could not process what his eyes were seeing. He saw the expensive suit, he saw the corner office, he saw the power. But then he looked at the face, he looked at the beard, gray and trimmed. He looked at the eyes, hard and unforgiving, and he looked at the knife in my hand. For a moment he stopped breathing, the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He dropped his briefcase. It hit the floor with a loud crack, spilling his glossy brochures across the carpet. "Hello, Braden," I said softly, toying with the knife blade. "You are looking a little pale. Did you have a rough flight?" "Ezekiel," he whispered. It was more of a gasp than a word. You are the janitor here." I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf that has just cornered a rabbit. "No, Braden." I stood up, smoothing the lapels of my $3,000 suit. "I am the landlord. And I think your rent is past due." The phone call that sealed Braden's fate lasted exactly 3 minutes and 42 seconds. I know this because I timed it. I was sitting in the adjacent office watching the digital timer on the recording software while Marcus, my business partner, and the man Braden thought was just a secretary made the call. It is a strange feeling to watch a man dig his own grave with his mouth. Most people use a shovel, but Braden Cole preferred to use his ego. Marcus put the phone on speaker so I could hear every breath Braden took. The line rang and Braden picked up on the first ring. He didn't wait. He didn't play cool. That told me everything I needed to know. The sharks were circling him in Georgia, and he saw this phone call as the only lifeboat in the middle of a storm. "Mr. Cole," Marcus said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "This is the office of the chairman of Clara Holdings, regarding your inquiry about the property acquisition in Georgia." I could hear the shuffling of papers on the other end. I could hear Braden clearing his throat, trying to pitch his voice lower, trying to sound like a CEO instead of a man who was 3 days away from bankruptcy. "Yes," Braden said. "I have been expecting your call. My team and I are ready to move forward with the acquisition. We have prepared a very generous offer." Marcus cut him off. He was good at this. He knew exactly how to push Braden's buttons. "The chairman is not interested in your offer," Mr. Cole, Marcus said. "He is interested in closing. He is a busy man. He is flying to Tokyo on Wednesday for a summit on sustainable urban planning. He has exactly one window in his schedule. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp. You will have 5 minutes to present your case and sign the papers. If you are late or if the paperwork is not in order, he walks." 5 minutes, Braden sputtered. "But this is a complex real estate transaction. We need to discuss zoning and easements and—" "5 minutes, Mr. Cole," Marcus repeated. "Take it or leave it. The chairman does not negotiate with the clock." There was a pause. I held my breath. I wondered if Braden would have a moment of clarity. I wondered if he would ask who this chairman was. I wondered if he would realize that no legitimate businessman buys a piece of land in 5 minutes without due diligence. But greed is a powerful blinder, and desperation is deaf. "I will be there," Braden said quickly. "I will be on the first flight to Chicago, 9 o'clock. "Excellent," Marcus said. "Bring the contract. We will handle the notary." The line went dead. I looked at Marcus, and Marcus looked at me. He didn't smile. He just nodded. The trap was set. I watched Braden for the rest of the day through the lens of my private investigator's reports. He moved with the manic energy of a meth addict. He booked a first-class ticket he couldn't afford, putting it on a credit card that was already maxed out. He probably had to call the bank to get a temporary limit increase just to buy the seat. Then he sat down to write the contract. I have seen many contracts in my life. I have signed deals for bridges and skyscrapers. But what Braden Cole drafted that afternoon was not a contract. It was a theft. He sat in his crumbling study surrounded by boxes of unpaid bills, and he typed out a document that was designed to strip Clara Holdings of every single right. I saw the draft later. It was breathtaking in its arrogance. He included a clause that gave him full mineral and water rights to the land. He included a clause that absolved him of any environmental liability. And worst of all, he included a hidden clause in the fine print on page 12 that stated the seller would be responsible for 50% of the development costs of the access road. He was trying to trick the seller into paying for his road. He thought he was dealing with an absentee landlord. He thought he was dealing with some senile old money heir who just wanted a quick check. He thought he was the smartest man in the room. He chuckled to himself as he printed it out. I imagine he poured himself a drink. I imagine he looked at the cracked walls of his mansion and told himself that it didn't matter because tomorrow he would be rich again. He would get the land. He would get the investors. He would be the king of Cole Towers. He didn't know he was flying into a hurricane. The next morning, Chicago was covered in a thick blanket of gray fog. The ZMR Tower rose out of the mist like a black obsidian needle. It was the tallest building in the city, a testament to modern engineering, and it was my headquarters. I owned the top 3 floors. I arrived at 6. I wanted to be there long before he landed. I wanted to feel the building breathe. I sat in my office drinking black coffee, looking out at the clouds. I was wearing the suit, the charcoal gray Italian wool. It fit me like armor. At 8:30, the security desk called up. "Mr. Cole is here, sir. Send him up," I said. Braden stepped into the elevator. It was a high-speed lift that climbed 40 floors in less than a minute. I can only imagine what was going through his mind as the numbers ticked up. 10, 20, 30. His ears popping. The sensation of gravity pressing him down. He stepped out into the lobby of ZMR Solutions. It was a space designed to intimidate. The floors were black granite polished to a mirror shine. The walls were glass. In the center of the room was a massive scale model of a suspension bridge I had saved in San Francisco. Braden walked up to the receptionist. He was wearing his best suit, a navy blue number with a silk tie. He looked polished. He looked successful, but I could see the cracks. I was watching on the security monitor. I saw the way his hand shook when he signed the guest log. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. I saw the way he kept checking his watch. He was terrified, but he covered it with bluster. He winked at the receptionist. He adjusted his cufflinks. He paced the floor looking at the architectural awards on the wall. He probably didn't even read the names on them. If he had, he might have seen Ezekiel Robinson engraved on the brass plaques. But Braden didn't read. He scanned. At 8:55, Marcus walked out to greet him. "Mr. Cole," Marcus said, extending a hand. "I am Marcus King. We spoke on the phone." Braden shook his hand firmly, too firmly. A classic power move by a weak man. "Good to meet you, Marcus," Braden said, his voice booming in the quiet lobby. "Amazing offices you have here. Your chairman must do well for himself." "He does all right," Marcus said, his face unreadable. "He is ready for you now. Remember, you have 5 minutes. He has a car waiting downstairs to take him to the airport." "I understand," Braden said, patting his leather briefcase. "This won't take long. It is a simple transaction. A win-win for everyone. A win-win. That is what parasites always say before they feed." Marcus led him down the long hallway. The walls were lined with black and white photographs of construction sites, bridges being built, tunnels being dug, foundations being laid. They were photos of my life's work. Braden walked past them without a glance. He was focused on the heavy mahogany doors at the end of the hall, the doors to the boardroom. Inside, I was waiting. I had positioned my chair at the far end of the massive conference table. The table was 20 feet long, made of a single slab of reclaimed redwood. I sat with my back to the door facing the floor-to-ceiling window. All Braden would see when he entered was the back of a high leather chair and the silhouette of a man looking out at the city. I heard the heavy click of the door latch. "Mr. Cole is here, sir," Marcus announced from the doorway. I didn't turn around. I didn't speak. I just raised my hand in a small wave, acknowledging his presence but not granting him my attention. Braden walked into the room. I could hear his footsteps on the plush carpet. They were heavy, confident steps. He was walking into the lion's den, and he thought he was the lion. "Good morning, sir," Braden said, his voice projecting confidence. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice. I know you are a busy man, so I will get straight to the point." He placed his briefcase on the table. I heard the snaps open. I heard the rustle of paper. "I have the contracts right here," Braden continued. "I have taken the liberty of drafting a standard purchase agreement. It is very straightforward. Clara Holdings transfers the deed to lot number 4 to Cole Luxury Living. In exchange, we provide a certified check for $50,000. He paused, waiting for a reaction. I gave him none. I also included a clause that allows for future partnership, Braden added, trying to sweeten the deal. Once Cole Towers is built, the value of your remaining holdings in the area will skyrocket. I am effectively doing you a favor by taking this land off your hands. It has been sitting vacant for years, earning you nothing. I am going to turn it into gold. Turn it into gold. The arrogance was suffocating. He was standing there in my office telling me he was doing me a favor by stealing my land. Sir Braden asked. His voice faltered slightly. The silence was getting to him. I slowly rotated the gold pen in my fingers. I took a deep breath. I spun the chair around. The movement was smooth and silent. I turned until I was facing him directly. Braden was smiling his salesman smile, holding the pen out toward me. But as his eyes locked onto mine, the smile didn't just fade, it evaporated. It was a physical transformation. His eyes widened until I thought they might pop out of his skull. His jaw went slack. The color drained from his skin so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. He stumbled back a half step, his legs hitting the edge of the conference table. The pen dropped from his hand. It rolled across the redwood table with a hollow clattering sound. He blinked once, twice. He looked around the room as if checking for a hidden camera, as if this was some kind of cruel prank. Then he looked back at me. He saw the gray beard. He saw the scars on my hands. But he also saw the suit, the office, the power. His brain couldn't reconcile the two images. The homeless old man he had thrown out 7 years ago and the titan of industry sitting before him now. Ezekiel, he whispered. It came out as a squeak. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I looked at him with the cold indifference of a mountain looking at a bug. "Hello, Braden," I said softly. You are the chairman," he stammered. His hands were shaking violently now. "You are the janitor. You are the gardener." I leaned forward, placing my elbows on the table. "I am the man who built the floor you are standing on, Braden," I said. "And I am the man who owns the ground you are trying to steal." Braden looked at the contract on the table. Then he looked at the door. He wanted to run. I could smell the fear on him. It smelled like sweat and cheap cologne. But he couldn't run. He needed this deal. He needed it more than he needed air. So he did the only thing a coward knows how to do. He tried to bluff. "Is this a joke?" Braden asked, his voice rising in pitch. "Is this some kind of revenge game? Because I don't have time for this." "Ezekiel, where is the real owner? Where is the man with the money?" I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out a checkbook. I opened it and placed it on the table. "The money is right here, Braden," I said. "But the price just went up." Braden stared at the checkbook. He stared at me. He looked like a man who had just realized he wasn't swimming. He was sinking, and the water was getting very, very deep. The leather of the high-backed executive chair was cool against my spine, but my blood was running hot. I sat perfectly still, facing the floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over the Chicago skyline. From the 40th floor, the cars down on the street looked like toys, and the people were invisible specks. It was a long way up from the dirt and the mud where I had spent my life, but in that moment I didn't feel like a CEO. I felt like a hunter sitting in a blind waiting for the buck to step into the clearing. I heard the heavy mahogany door creak open behind me. It was a solid sound, expensive and heavy, just like everything else in this office. I had designed this room to intimidate. The carpet was thick enough to swallow footsteps, but I could still hear Braden approaching. He walked with a heavy, hurried cadence, the walk of a man who was running out of time. I could smell him before I saw him. That same cloying sandalwood cologne he had worn 7 years ago. Back then it smelled like arrogance. Today it smelled like desperation, masked by cheap chemicals. "Mr. Cole is here, sir," Marcus announced from the doorway, his voice smooth and professional. I raised my right hand just slightly, waving a dismissal to Marcus without turning around. I heard the door click shut, leaving us alone. Just me, Braden, and 7 years of silence. "Good morning, Mr. Chairman." Braden's voice rang out. It was louder than it needed to be. He was projecting, trying to fill the room with a confidence he didn't feel. I could hear the tremor underneath the bluster. It was the sound of a man standing on a trapdoor hoping the latch holds. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." Braden continued his footsteps, moving closer to the massive redwood table. "I know your time is valuable, so I will be brief. I have brought the transfer documents for the Georgia property. It is a simple acquisition, really. A win-win for both of us." I didn't answer. I reached into the breast pocket of my charcoal Italian suit and pulled out a small object. It was a piece of cedar wood no bigger than my thumb. I had picked it up from the construction site yesterday. With my other hand, I pulled out my old buck knife. The handle was worn smooth by decades of use, the blade sharpened to a razor edge. I started to whittle. Shk, shk, shk. The sound of the steel slicing through the dry wood was sharp and rhythmic in the quiet room. It was a sound that belonged on a porch in the country, not in a boardroom in the sky. Braden paused. I could feel his confusion radiating off his back. He had expected a handshake. He had expected a greeting. Instead, he got the sound of manual labor. Sir Braden asked, his voice faltering slightly. Is this a bad time? I kept whittling. Shh, shh. I watched a curl of cedar fall onto the pristine leather of my chair. No, I said, my voice low and rough. It is exactly the right time. Braden seemed to regain his footing. He cleared his throat. Excellent. Well, as I was saying, my company, Cole Luxury Living, is poised to break ground on a revolutionary development. We just need the access rights through your lot. I have the papers right here. If you could just sign on the dotted line, we can have the check wired to your account by noon. $50,000. It is a very generous offer for undeveloped land. Generous, I thought. $50,000 for the key to his salvation. He was trying to buy a lifeboat for the price of a life jacket. I stopped whittling. I held the small piece of wood up to the light. I had carved it into a point, a stake. I placed the knife on the table. It made a solid clack sound against the polished wood. Braden, I said, speaking to the window. Do you know what happens to a house when you build it on a lie? Braden went silent. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Excuse me, he asked. I don't think I understand the metaphor. We are talking about land, sir. Raw land. I took a deep breath. I gripped the armrests of the chair. My knuckles were scarred and gnarled, the hands of a worker wrapped around the leather of a king. It isn't a metaphor, I said. It is physics. I pushed off with my foot. The chair mechanism was smooth, silent, and well-oiled. I spun around. The movement was slow, deliberate. I turned 180 degrees until I was facing him directly. Braden was standing there, clutching his leather briefcase to his chest like a shield. He was wearing a navy blue suit that looked expensive, but I could see the fraying at the cuffs. His face was tan, but his eyes were tired, surrounded by dark circles that no amount of concealer could hide. He was smiling that plastic salesman smile ready to charm the mysterious billionaire. But as his eyes locked onto mine, the smile didn't just fade. It shattered. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. First came the confusion. His brain registered my face, but it couldn't place it. He saw the gray beard neatly trimmed. He saw the deep lines etched into my forehead. He saw the dark skin. Then came the recognition. His pupils dilated. His jaw went slack, dropping open in a caricature of shock. The blood drained from his face so fast it looked like he was about to faint. He stumbled back a step, his legs hitting the edge of the heavy table. The briefcase slipped from his fingers. It hit the floor with a dull thud, spilling glossy brochures and legal documents across the carpet. He didn't even notice. He was staring at me, as if I were a ghost that had risen from the grave to haunt him. Ezekiel, he whispered. It was barely a sound. It was a gasp of air escaping a collapsing lung. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just sat there holding the small wooden stake in one hand and the knife in the other. I looked him up and down, taking in every detail of his terror. "Hello, Braden," I said softly. He blinked rapidly, shaking his head as if trying to clear a hallucination. He looked around the room. He looked at the expensive art on the walls. He looked at the view of the city. He looked at my suit, the fabric shimmering under the recessed lighting. Then he looked back at my hands. He saw the knife, the old rusty buck knife he had seen 1,000 times when I lived in the guest cottage. His brain short-circuited. He couldn't reconcile the two realities, the billionaire chairman and the dirty old man he had thrown out like trash. So his mind grabbed onto the only explanation that made sense to his arrogant worldview. He let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. It sounded hysterical. You work here," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. He wiped sweat from his upper lip, looking toward the door, expecting the real owner to walk in. "Is that it, Ezekiel?" He laughed again, more manic this time. "You got a job here. What are you?" The janitor, the maintenance guy. Did the chairman let you sit in his chair while he is out to lunch? He took a step forward, his confidence rushing back like a tide. For a second, he thought he was safe again. He thought I was just the help playing dress-up. Jesus, you almost gave me a heart attack, he said, letting out a breath. Look, get up. Get up before the boss comes in. I have a meeting with the owner of Clara Holdings. If he sees the janitor sitting in his chair playing with a knife, he is going to fire you. And frankly, you probably need this job. He reached out as if to shoo me away. Go on, Ezekiel. Go empty the trash cans or whatever you do. I have business to conduct. Real business. I looked at his hand waving in my face. The same hand that had pointed at the door 7 years ago. The same hand that had thrown my maple tree onto the driveway. I picked up the knife. I folded the blade shut with a sharp click. I stood up. I am 6'2". Even at 79, my back is straight. I rose from the chair, unfolding my frame until I towered over him. I smoothed the lapels of my charcoal suit. I adjusted my silk tie. Braden took a step back, his eyes widening again. He realized suddenly that janitors don't wear $3,000 suits. Janitors don't have corner offices. And janitors don't look at you with the cold, hard eyes of an executioner. I walked around the table slowly. I stopped right in front of him. I was close enough to see the gray hairs he was trying to hide with dye. I am not the janitor, Braden, I said, my voice deep and resonant, filling the room. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a set of keys. I tossed them onto the table. They landed on top of his spilled papers. I am the landlord. Braden stared at the keys. Then he looked at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His knees actually buckled and he had to grab the back of a chair to stay upright. No, he whimpered. No. Clara Holdings. Clara? He finally made the connection. Your wife, he whispered. Her name was Clara. I nodded slowly. You forgot her name, Braden, just like you forgot mine. Just like you forgot that you don't build a castle on dirt you haven't tested. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. You have 5 minutes, Braden, I said, not looking at him. You are already down to 3. But the land, he stammered. You own lot number 4. I turned back to him. I own lot number 4. I own the timberland to the north. I own the marsh to the south. And as of this morning, I bought the note on your second mortgage from the bank. Braden's mouth fell open. I own you, Braden, I said coldly. I have you surrounded. You are sitting on an island and the water is rising. And the only man with a boat is the man you called trash. Braden looked at the door. He looked at the window. He looked like he wanted to vomit. This is illegal, he shouted, his voice cracking. This is entrapment. You lured me here. You can't do this. I can do whatever I want, I said, because I have the gold, and you have the debt. I pointed to the chair opposite me, the small, uncomfortable chair we reserved for junior associates. Sit down, Braden. He didn't move. He stood there shaking. I said, sit down. I barked, my voice echoing the command I used to give on construction sites. It was the voice of a foreman, the voice of authority. Braden collapsed into the chair. He looked small. He looked broken. Now, I said, walking back to my seat and picking up the gold-plated pen Marcus had left there. You came here to make a deal, so let's make a deal. But I warn you, the price has changed. It is not $50,000 anymore. Braden looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. A desperate, pathetic hope. What is the price, he asked. I leaned forward. The price is everything. The silence in the boardroom was broken by the sound of the side door opening. Marcus walked in carrying a thick leather-bound folio. He didn't look like the polite receptionist anymore. He looked like what he truly was, a brilliant, ruthless attorney who had spent the last 7 years sharpening his teeth on corporate litigation. He walked past Braden without a glance and stood at my right hand, placing the folio on the table with a heavy, deliberate thud. Mr. Cole, allow me to make the formal introduction, Marcus said, his voice crisp and cold. You are currently seated in the headquarters of ZMR Solutions. The Z stands for Zeke, the M stands for Marcus, and the R stands for Restoration. The gentleman you are speaking to is Mr. Ezekiel Robinson, the majority shareholder of ZMR and the sole proprietor of Clara Holdings, LLC. Braden looked from Marcus to me and back again, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. He tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. He coughed a pathetic hacking sound. You own ZMR. Braden wheezed. But ZMR is the biggest structural engineering firm in the Midwest. You fix skyscrapers. You fix bridges. We fix mistakes. Braden, I said, leaning back in my chair. We fix the kind of mistakes arrogant men make when they think they are smarter than the ground they walk on. I reached for the folio Marcus had brought in. I flipped it open. It wasn't a contract for the land sale. It was a geological survey, a series of complex blue and red maps showing the underground topography of the area surrounding my old estate. I spun the folio around so Braden could see it. "Look at this, Braden," I said, pointing to a thick blue line that ran diagonally across the map. "This is the aquifer. It is a subterranean river that flows from the North Ridge down to the wetlands. It carries millions of gallons of water every year." I traced the line with my finger until it hit a red square, the location of his mansion. "You see this red box? That is your house. Braden, that is the castle you kicked me out of, and right here I tapped a spot right next to the house is the garage you built 7 years ago. Do you remember the garage, Braden? Do you remember telling the foreman to pour concrete over the bleeding vein because you had a magazine photo shoot?" Braden nodded slowly, sweat dripping off his nose onto the expensive mahogany table. I remember. We sealed it. We stopped the water." I laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. "You didn't stop anything, son. You just pressurized it. When you capped that vein, you turned the ground under your house into a water balloon. And for 7 years, that water has been looking for a way out. It has been pushing against the clay. It has been eating away at the limestone foundation. It is the reason your doors won't close. It is the reason your patio cracked. It is the reason your life is falling apart." Braden stared at the map, horror dawning on his face. But that is on my land," he stammered. "If it is on my land, I can fix it. I will hire a crew. I will drill relief wells." I shook my head slowly, enjoying the moment. "That is the problem, Braden. You can't drill. You see, when I bought lot number 4, the land right next to yours, I didn't just buy the dirt, I bought the mineral rights, and more importantly, I bought the water rights for the entire southern slope of the ridge." I pulled another document from the pile. It was a deed stamped with the official seal of the state of Georgia. "I own the water, Braden. I own every drop that flows under your foundation. And 3 years ago, while you were busy buying watches, I installed a hydrostatic diversion valve system on my property on lot number 4. It connects to the main artery of that aquifer." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Right now that valve is set to neutral. It is letting the water flow naturally, which is why your house is sinking slowly. But I have a control panel right here on my iPad." I tapped the screen of the tablet sitting next to me. "I have 2 options. Braden, option A, I close the valve. If I close the valve, the water backs up instantly. The pressure under your garage will triple within 24 hours. The concrete slab will crack. The soil will liquefy. Your $50 million mansion will slide down the hill into the swamp like a mudslide. It will be a total structural failure. The house will snap in half." Braden gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "And option B?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Option B. I open the valve wide. I drain the aquifer completely. If I do that, the clay under your house dries out. It shrinks. The ground will collapse inward, creating a sinkhole that will swallow your living room whole." I sat back, crossing my arms. "So you see, Braden, you are not just sitting in my office. You are sitting on my water. You are living in a house that exists only because I allow it to exist. I am the dam, and you are just the village in the valley." Braden looked at the map, then at the iPad, then at me. He looked sick. He looked like a man who had just realized he wasn't playing poker, he was playing Russian roulette, and I held the gun. You can't do that," he whispered. "This is extortion. You are threatening to destroy my property." "I am not threatening anything," I said calmly. "I am simply managing my water resources. If I choose to divert the water on my land for an irrigation project, that is my legal right. If your house happens to be collateral damage, well, that is just unfortunate geology, isn't it?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gray Chicago sky. "You called me trash, Braden. You told me I was worthless. You told me to go live in a landfill. But here we are 7 years later, and I hold the deed to your salvation." I turned back to him. You came here to buy land for $50,000, but the land isn't for sale. The only thing on the table today is your survival." Braden slumped in his chair. The fight had left him. He wasn't the CEO anymore. He wasn't the master of the universe. He was just a man who had dug a hole too deep to climb out of. "What? What do you want?" he asked, looking at his hands. I walked back to the table. I picked up the contract he had brought, the one with the insulting offer and the hidden clauses. I ripped it in half slowly, letting the sound of tearing paper fill the room. Then I ripped it again and dropped the pieces onto the floor. "I don't want your money, Braden. I have more money in my petty cash drawer than you have in your entire company. I don't want your apology because I know it wouldn't be sincere." I reached into the folio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a simple document. 1 page. No fine print. Marcus had drafted it that morning. "This is a transfer of ownership agreement," I said, sliding it across the table toward him. "It transfers 100% of the equity in coal. Luxury Living to Clara Holdings. It transfers the deed to the estate, the mansion, the land, everything to me. And in exchange, I will assume your debts. I will pay off the bank. I will stabilize the foundation, and I will prevent the house from collapsing." Braden stared at the paper. "You want everything," he whispered. "You want my company. You want my home. It isn't your home," I snapped, my voice rising. "Your name is on the deed, but you never made it a home. A home is where you protect your family. A home is where you build a legacy. You turned that place into a showroom for your vanity, and now the rent is due." Braden looked at the paper, tears welling up in his eyes. But what about me? What do I get?" I pointed to the bottom of the page. "You get to walk away. You get to avoid bankruptcy. You get to avoid a lawsuit from your investors for fraud, because we both know you lied on those disclosure forms about the foundation damage. You get to keep your freedom." I pulled a single crisp $1 bill from my pocket and placed it on top of the document, and you get this. $1. The fair market value of a man who builds nothing but lies. Braden stared at the dollar bill. George Washington looked back at him, stern and unforgiving. "I can't sign this," he sobbed. "I have a reputation. I have a status in this town. If I sell for $1, I will be a laughingstock." I leaned down close enough to smell the fear on him. "You are already a laughingstock. Braden, the bank knows, the investors know, and soon the whole world will know that your castle is made of mud. But if you sign this, we can frame it as a strategic acquisition. We can say you are stepping down to pursue other interests. We can let you keep a shred of your dignity. Not because you deserve it, but because my daughter carries your last name, and I don't want her to suffer for your stupidity more than she already has." I uncapped the gold pen and held it out to him. It was the same pen he had tried to hand me moments ago, thinking he was the boss, thinking he was the winner. Now the tables had turned. The pen felt heavy in the air. "The choice is yours, Braden," I said. "Sign the paper and walk away, or leave this room," and I opened the valve on my iPad. "By the time you land in Atlanta, and your living room will be underwater." Braden looked at the pen. He looked at me. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely lift his arm. He reached out, his fingers trembling, and took the pen. He looked at the document, the transfer of ownership. He looked at the dollar bill. He let out a sob, a broken sound of total defeat. And then slowly, painfully, he lowered the pen to the paper. "Sign it, Braden," I commanded, "or sink." The gold pen hovered over the paper, trembling like a leaf in a gale wind. Braden looked at the document that would strip him of his company, his home, and his name, giving it all to me for a single $1. He looked at the dollar bill, George Washington staring back at him with a flat, unblinking gaze. Braden's chest was heaving. He looked like a man having a coronary event right there in my conference room. "Drop the pen, Braden," I said softly. "The ink is drying." Braden made a sound in his throat, a strangled whimper. Then his hand opened. The heavy gold pen clattered onto the mahogany table, rolling away from him until it hit the edge and fell to the floor, landing on the expensive carpet with a muffled thud. He didn't bend down to pick it up. Instead, he slid out of the chair. It wasn't a graceful movement. He didn't stand up. He simply melted. He slid off the leather seat, his knees hitting the floor with a heavy, bone-jarring impact. He grabbed the edge of the table with both hands, his fingers digging into the wood, as if the room were tilting, and he was about to fall off the edge of the world. "Dad," he choked out. The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Dad. He hadn't called me that in 10 years. Not since the wedding day. Even then it sounded forced. Today it sounded like a plea from a man on death row. Please, Dad. Braden sobbed, tears finally spilling over his eyelids and running down his cheeks. You can't do this. You can't take everything I have worked for. I stood up slowly, walking around the table until I was standing right in front of him. I looked down at the top of his head, noting the thinning hair he tried so hard to hide. He was kneeling at my feet, wearing a suit that cost more than my first house. And he looked smaller than an insect I didn't work for at Braden. I said, my voice cold and hard. You stole it. You borrowed it. And you squandered it. No, you don't understand, he cried, looking up at me. His face was a mask of snot and tears, panic making his eyes wide and wild. It isn't just the house. It isn't just the bank. If I don't get this land, if I don't break ground on the towers by next month, I go to jail. He grabbed my pant leg, clutching the fabric of my Italian trousers with his sweaty hands. I took deposits. Dad, I took pre-sale deposits from investors. $3 million. I spent it. I spent it on the mortgage. I spent it on the car. I spent it trying to fix the foundation. If the project fails, they will audit me. They will see the money is gone. They will charge me with fraud, embezzlement. I will go to federal prison. I looked down at his hands gripping my leg, the hands that had never held a shovel, the hands that had never built a damn thing. So you are a thief too, I said simply. Not just a squatter. A thief. I did it for Maya. He screamed, desperate to find an angle that would work. I did it for the family, for your grandchildren. Think about Leo. Think about Sarah. Do you want their father to be a felon? Do you want them visiting me through a glass wall? You have to help me. You have to sign the land over to me as a partnership. If we are partners, I can show the bank we have assets. I can get a bridge loan. I can fix this. He was using them. My grandchildren. The children he barely saw because he was too busy at country clubs or photo shoots. He was using my own blood as a human shield. I reached down and peeled his fingers off my leg one by one. His grip was weak. I stepped back, creating distance between us. Don't you speak their names, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You didn't think about Leo and Sarah when you threw their grandfather out into the street, did you? You didn't think about Maya when you buried a water vein under a garage just to park a car? I did what I had to do, Braden blubbered, crawling forward on his knees, dragging himself across the carpet. Please, Ezekiel, I am begging you. I am on my knees. Look at me. I am begging you for my life. Just sign the partnership agreement. Use your money to stabilize the company. We can be rich together. We'll give you 50%. No, 60%. Just save me. I looked at him kneeling there, a broken man in a power suit. And for a moment my mind flashed back. 7 years ago. The marble foyer, the smell of expensive candles, the sound of techno music. I remembered the look on his face when he saw the dirt on his floor, the way he had pointed a finger at me as if I were a disease. Get up, Braden, I said. He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. You will help me, I said. Get up! He scrambled to his feet, wiping his face with his sleeve, trying to compose himself. He thought he had won. He thought the sight of his humiliation was enough to satisfy me. I walked over to the table. I picked up the pen from the floor. I held it out, but I didn't offer it to him. 7 years ago, Braden, I stood in your hallway holding a maple tree. A gift. And you looked at me and you called me filthy. You said I was a stain. You said I smelled like a grave because I had honest dirt on my hands. Braden flinched, looking down at his shoes. I was angry. Then I continued. But today I realize you were right about one thing. We are different. I held the pen up to the light. It was gold, shiny, pristine. You see, Braden, I spent 40 years with dirt under my fingernails. I spent my life mixing concrete and sawing wood. My hands are stained with labor. And you have spent your life keeping your hands clean. You hire people to dig. You hire people to build. You hire people to lie for you. I dropped the pen onto the document. It landed with a final click. I am still that filthy old man, Braden. I am still the trash you threw out. And I don't want my dirty hands touching your clean partnership. I don't want my name next to yours on any piece of paper that promises a future, because you don't have a future. You have a debt." Braden's face crumbled. The hope vanished, replaced by a fresh wave of terror. "You aren't going to sign," he whispered. "No," I said. "I am not going to sign a partnership. I am not going to bail you out. I am not going to help you lie to the FBI or the SEC or whoever is coming for you." I pointed to the transfer agreement, the one that sold everything for $1. "You have two choices, Braden. Choice one, you sign this paper, you give me the company, you give me the house, you give me the land, and I will use my own money to pay back the investors you stole from. I will keep you out of prison, not for you, but so my grandchildren don't have to carry the shame of your name." Braden stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. "And choice two?" I asked. "Choice two. You walk out of here. You keep your pride. You keep your title of CEO. And tomorrow morning, I open the valve. I sink your house. And when the investors ask where their money went, you can explain it to them from a jail cell." I checked my watch, a Patek Philippe I had bought just for this meeting. "You have 60 seconds. The clock is ticking." Braden looked at the door. He looked at the window. He looked at Marcus, who was standing silently in the corner holding a notary stamp. He was trapped. He was a rat in a maze, and I had closed all the exits. He began to cry again, but this time it was a quiet, defeated sobbing. The crying of a man who realizes his life is over. "Give me the pen," he whispered. I didn't hand it to him. I pointed to the table. "Pick it up yourself." Braden reached out his hand, shaking so badly he knocked the pen over twice before he could grasp it. He gripped it like a lifeline. He bent over the document, the paper that represented his entire existence, his legacy, his ego. He hesitated, the tip of the pen hovering over the signature line. I am sorry," he choked out. It sounded hollow. It sounded like a reflex. "Save your apologies for the judge, Braden," I said. "Sign." He pressed the pen to the paper. He scrawled his name, Braden Cole. It was messy, barely legible, the signature of a beaten man. Marcus stepped forward immediately. He stamped the document. He signed as a witness. He pulled the paper away before Braden could change his mind. "It is done," Marcus said. I picked up the dollar bill, the single crisp dollar bill. I handed it to Braden. "Here," I said. "This is yours. You earned it." Braden took the dollar. He held it in his limp hand, staring at it as if he didn't know what it was. "Now get out," I said, turning my back on him, walking toward the window. "Get out of my building, get out of my company, and get out of my house. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises." "And Braden..." He stopped at the door, looking back at me with dead eyes. "Take your trash with you." I heard the door close. I heard his footsteps fade down the hallway. I let out a breath, leaning my forehead against the cool glass of the window. I looked down at the city. The cars were still moving. The world was still turning. I had won. I had taken back what was mine. I had destroyed the man who tried to destroy me. But as I stood there, 79 years old in an empty boardroom, I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired because the war was over, but the cleanup was just beginning, and the hardest part was yet to come, Maya. I thought the signing of the paper was the end. I thought watching Braden sell his soul for a dollar bill was the climax of this tragedy. But I was wrong. Braden Cole was a coward, and cowards always have one last move. They always have a human shield waiting in the wings. He hadn't just come to Chicago with a briefcase full of lies. He had brought a hostage. He stood by the door, holding the signed transfer agreement in one hand and his phone in the other. He wasn't leaving. He was looking at me with a twisted sort of desperation, a man who realizes the boat is sinking, so he decides to throw the cargo overboard to see if he can float. "She is downstairs," he said, his voice cracking. I froze. The air in the boardroom seemed to thicken, pushing against my chest. "Who is downstairs, Maya?" he whispered. "She came with me. She wanted to see the city. She wanted to shop while I did business. But I called her when I was in the lobby. I told her to come up. You brought my daughter here." I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "You brought her to watch you beg. I brought her because she is your daughter," Braden screamed suddenly, finding a reserve of manic energy. You won't hurt her. You might hate me, Ezekiel. You might want to destroy me, but you won't destroy her. If you sink the company, if you take the house, you are putting her on the street too. And I know you. You are too proud to let your little girl starve. He pressed the button on the intercom. Send her in, he barked. The heavy mahogany doors opened again, and there she was. I hadn't seen Maya in 7 years. The last time I saw her, she was standing in a marble kitchen wearing diamonds, looking away while her husband threw me out. She was 32, then vibrant, glowing with the arrogance of new money. The woman standing in the doorway now looked 50. She was wearing a designer coat, but it was a season old and I could see a missing button near the hem. Her hair, which used to be a glossy raven black, was dull, pulled back into a severe bun that highlighted the gaunt lines of her face. She was thin, too thin, the kind of thin that comes from skipping meals, not from the gym. Her eyes were shadowed, darting around the room with a nervous, frenetic energy, like a bird trapped in a house. "Daddy," she breathed. She didn't look at the view. She didn't look at the luxury office. She looked straight at me, and then she ran. She crossed the room in 3 strides and threw her arms around me. It wasn't a warm hug. It was a collision. She buried her face in my chest, sobbing, clutching the lapels of my suit as if I were a life raft in the middle of the ocean. "Daddy, I missed you so much," she cried. Her perfume smelled stale, like it had been applied to cover up the scent of fear. "I am so sorry. We looked for you." "We really did. Braden tried to find you." I looked over her head at Braden. He was standing by the window, smoothing his tie, nodding, encouraging her to lie. I stood rigid. I didn't hug her back. Not yet. My arms hung by my sides, heavy as lead. "Maya," I said softly. "Look at me." She pulled back, wiping her eyes with hands that were shaking. Her nails were bitten down to the quick. "Daddy, please," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "You have to help us. Braden told me everything. He told me you own the land. He told me you are ZMR. He said he made a mistake. He said he was disrespectful years ago and he is sorry. But you can't destroy us. Daddy, you can't." She grabbed my hands. Her palms were cold and clammy. "He is just stressed." "Daddy," she pleaded, looking at Braden with a terrifying desperation. "He is a visionary. He takes risks. Sometimes he takes big risks, but he does it for us. He has just died. He didn't mean to hurt anyone. He is a good man. He loves me. He loves the kids. We are just in a tight spot. If you sign the partnership, if you give him the land, we can fix everything. Please, Daddy, don't let the bank take our home. It is the only home the kids have ever known." I looked at her breaking apart in front of me. She was parroting his words. She was reciting a script he had fed her for years. She truly believed that Braden was a misunderstood genius and I was the barrier to their happiness. It broke my heart. But sometimes to set a bone, you have to break it first. "Maya," I said gently, pulling my hands away from hers, "you think he is a good man?" "Yes," she sobbed. "He works so hard. He worries so much. He does everything for this family." I looked at Braden. He was watching us. His eyes narrowed, calculating. He thought he had won. He thought the tears of his wife would wash away his sins. "Marcus," I said without looking away from my daughter. The file Marcus stepped forward silently. He placed a black folder on the table. It wasn't the geological survey. It wasn't the deed. It was a financial forensic report. I picked it up. "I felt the weight of it, Maya," I said. "Braden told you the company is broke, right? He told you the market turned against him." She nodded, sniffing. "Yes, the economy, the interest rates." I opened the folder. "The company is broke. Maya, because Braden stole the—" "Money lies," Braden shouted, starting to move toward us. "That is confidential corporate data. You can't show her that." "Stay back!" I roared. My voice echoed off the glass walls, stopping him in his tracks. I turned the folder toward Maya. "Look at this," I commanded. She looked down, confused. Her eyes scanned the columns of numbers. "What is this?" she asked. "This is a list of wire transfers," I explained, pointing to the dates. Over the last 3 years, while you were borrowing money from your friends to buy groceries, while you were maxing out your credit cards to keep the lights on in that sinking mansion. Braden was moving money. I flipped the page. $2 million. Maya moved to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, an account named BC Holdings, not Cole Family Trust, not Maya and Braden, just Braden. Maya looked up, her face pale, but maybe he was saving it, maybe it was a rainy day fund. I flipped another page. This page had photographs in this, I said, pointing to a picture of a sleek, modern condo overlooking the ocean. This is the rainy day fund. It is a penthouse in Miami South Beach, purchased 18 months ago. Cash. Maya stared at the photo. She touched the glossy paper. We don't have a house in Miami, she whispered. You don't, I corrected. He does. I flipped to the next page. This one hurt the most. This one was the knife in the gut, and he doesn't go there alone. Maya. The photos were clear. They were taken by a private investigator I had hired 6 months ago. They showed Braden on the balcony of the Miami penthouse. He was holding a drink, he was laughing, and he had his arm around a woman. She was young, maybe 22, blonde, fit, everything. Maya used to be before Braden drained the life out of her. Maya stopped breathing. She stared at the woman in the picture. She stared at Braden's hand resting possessively on the woman's waist. Her name is Tiffany, I said, my voice flat. She is an Instagram model. Braden has been paying her rent, her car lease, and her credit card bills for 2 years, using the money investors gave him for the Cole Towers project. Maya made a sound, a low keen of animal pain. She looked at the numbers. She saw the transfers, $5,000 to Tiffany, $10,000 to Tiffany. Meanwhile, Maya was wearing a coat with a missing button. It gets worse, I said mercilessly. I had to burn the illusion completely. I turned to the final section of the report. Look at the debt. Maya, look at the loans for the Georgia estate. Look at the credit lines for the business. She looked. Her eyes widened in horror. They are in my name, she whispered. Yes, I said. Braden put the assets, the cash, the Miami condo, the Cayman account in his name. But the debt, the mortgages, the liability, the risk, he put all of that in your name. He forged your signature on some documents and coerced you into signing others, claiming they were routine tax forms. I slammed the folder shut. He didn't bring you here to save the family, Maya. He brought you here because he knows that when this house of cards falls, you are the one who is going to be buried under the rubble. He set you up to take the fall. He prepared a parachute for himself and he strapped an anchor to your back. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Maya turned slowly, very slowly to face her husband. Braden was standing by the window. His face was pale, but he wasn't crying. He looked annoyed. He looked like a man whose scheme had been exposed and he was just calculating the next move. Is it true? Maya asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. Wasn't the voice of a victim anymore? It was the voice of a woman waking up from a 7-year coma. Braden sighed. He adjusted his cufflinks. Maya, baby, look. Your father is manipulating the data. He is taking things out of context. The Miami apartment is an investment property. It is for the business. And Tiffany, she is just a consultant. She is an interior designer. It is strictly professional. A consultant, Maya repeated. She looked down at the photo of the woman sitting on Braden's lap. You told me we couldn't afford a tutor for Leo, she said, her voice rising, shaking with a sudden violent fury. You told me we had to cut back on groceries. You told me I was spending too much money at Target and you were buying penthouses in Miami. Braden threw up his hands. I was doing it for us, he screamed. It was a hedge. If the Georgia project failed, we needed a backup plan. I was protecting our future. Our future, Maya screamed. You put the debt in my name. You put the risk on me. You made me beg my father to save us while you had $2 million sitting in an island account. She lunged at him. It wasn't a graceful move. She clawed at his face, her fingernails leaving red streaks down his cheek. You are a monster, she shrieked. You are a parasite. Braden shoved her back hard. She stumbled and fell onto one of the leather chairs. Enough, he yelled, straightening his jacket. You are hysterical. You are just like your father, emotional, irrational. You don't understand finance. I stepped forward, then stepping between them. I understand finance, Braden, I said, cold as ice. And I understand leverage. I picked up the signed transfer agreement, the one he had sold for $1. You signed this, I said. You transferred the company to me. That means I own the assets, but I also own the right to audit the books I looked at. Marcus, call the FB. I tell them we have a case of corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and identity theft. And tell them the perpetrator is currently in my office. Braden's eyes bulged. No, he gasped. You promised? You said if I signed you would keep me out of jail. I lied, I said simply. Just like you lied to my daughter for 7 years. I looked at Maya. She was sitting in the chair, staring at her husband as if he were a stranger. She looked old, she looked broken, but her eyes were clear. The fog was gone. I'm sorry, Maya, I said gently. I couldn't save your marriage, but I can save you from the debt. I pointed to the door. Get out, Braden. Wait in the lobby for the authorities, and don't you dare look at my daughter again. Braden looked at me. He looked at Maya. The woman who had worshipped him for a decade turned her head away, refusing to acknowledge his existence. He was alone. He turned and walked out the door. His shoulders slumped. The fight gone. He was a man with $1 in his pocket and a prison sentence in his future. I walked over to Maya and put my hand on her shoulder. She leaned into me, and for the first time in 7 years she really hugged me. She wept not for him, but for the time she had lost. It is okay, baby girl, I whispered. We are going to fix this. We are going to rebuild. It starts today. The air in the boardroom was toxic, filled with the stench of exposed lies and the remnants of a marriage that had just died on the floor. Braden stood alone near the window, his chest heaving, his eyes darting between me and the sobbing form of my daughter. He looked like a cornered rat, realizing that the trap had no exit, but his arrogance, that fatal flaw that had defined his entire life, refused to let him accept defeat. He straightened his jacket, smoothing the lapels with trembling hands. He took a deep breath, trying to summon the ghost of the CEO he pretended to be. Fine. Braden spat, his voice shaking with a mix of rage and fear. You exposed me, you showed her the pictures, you humiliated me in front of my wife. Are you happy now, Ezekiel? Is your petty revenge complete? Because if it is, we have business to conclude. He walked back to the table, avoiding Maya's gaze. He looked at the torn pieces of his original contract scattered on the floor, then looked at me with a sneer. You have had your fun, have. Braden said, trying to regain control. Now let's talk reality. You own the land. You own the water rights. You have me over a barrel, I admit it. So name your price. How much for the water rights? How much to keep the foundation from sinking? I will pay you a premium. Once the tower is built, I will have the cash flow. I will write you a check that will choke you. Just give me the number. I looked at him, sitting there calmly, while my daughter's life lay in ruins. He still thought this was a transaction. He still thought money could fix the rot in his soul. He didn't understand that I wasn't looking for profit. I was looking for excision. I sat down slowly, keeping my eyes locked on his. I placed my hands on the mahogany table, the rough, scarred skin of my fingers contrasting with the polished wood. There is no number. Braden, I said, my voice low and steady. Braden blinked, confusion clouding his face. What do you mean? Everyone has a number. You are a businessman, aren't you? You are the chairman of ZMRU. Didn't get here by turning down profit. I didn't get here by making deals with thieves, I corrected. I leaned forward. You are under the impression that I want to sell you the land so you can build your tower, I said. You think I want to be your partner? Braden nodded. Yes, exactly. A joint venture. We can restructure the deal. I can give you equity. I shook my head slowly. I don't want equity in a sinking ship, I said. I don't want the land to build a tower, Braden. I want the land to bury you. The color drained from his face again. I am not selling you the land, I continued. I am not selling you the water rights. The valve stays closed or it opens, depending on my mood. The tower will never be built. The project is dead. Braden slammed his hand on the table. You can't do that, he screamed. You can't kill the project. I have investors. I have loans. If the tower doesn't go up, I lose everything. Exactly. I said. I reached into my folio and pulled out a new document. It was a single page, simple and brutal. Here is my offer, I said, sliding it across the table. Braden looked at it, reading the text frantically. This is a purchase agreement, he stammered. It is. I confirmed I am offering to buy Cole Luxury Living. The entire company. Every asset, every liability, every piece of equipment, and every share of stock. Braden looked up, his eyes wide. You want to buy my company? I do. For how much, he asked, hope flickering in his eyes like a dying candle. If he sold, he could pay off his debts. He could run away to Miami with his mistress. He thought I was offering him a golden parachute. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single crumpled dollar bill. I smoothed it out on the table, placing it on top of the document. $1, I said. The room went silent. The hum of the city outside seemed to fade away. Braden stared at the dollar bill as if it were a venomous snake. $1, he whispered. Is this a joke? It is not a joke, I said. It is a mercy. The company is worthless, Braden. It is drowning in debt. The assets are leveraged to the hilt. The reputation is toxic. The only thing of value is the land. And we already control that I am buying a corpse. I pointed to Maya, who was still sitting in the corner watching us with hollow eyes. But there is a condition. I said. I tapped the paper. If you sell me the company for $1, I will assume all corporate debts. I will pay off the bank. I will pay back the investors you defrauded. And most importantly, I will absolve Maya of all personal guarantees. The loans you tricked her into signing, I will pay them. She walks away. Clean. She keeps the car. She keeps her dignity, and she owes nothing. Braden looked at Maya, then back at the dollar. And me? He asked, his voice trembling. What do I get? I looked him dead in the eye. You get the dollar, I said, and you get to stay out of prison for today. You walk away, Braden. You leave this city. You leave my daughter. You leave my grandchildren. You disappear. If you sign this, I won't hand the fraud evidence to the FBI immediately. I will give you a 24-hour head start. Braden stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. The insult was too much for his ego to handle. He was Braden Cole, the visionary, the tycoon. And this dirty old man in a suit was offering him pocket change for his empire. No, he screamed. He swept his arm across the table, sending the papers and the dollar bill flying. They fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. I won't do it, he yelled, his face turning a violent shade of purple. I won't sign. This is robbery. This is coercion. I will sue you. I will sue you for everything you have. He paced the room frantically, pointing a shaking finger at me. You think you can bully me? I have lawyers. I have connections. I will claim duress. I will tell the court you trapped me. I will tell them you manipulated the water table. That is eco-terrorism. I will bury you in litigation for the next 10 years. You have no money for lawyers, Braden, I said calmly, picking up the dollar bill from the floor. You have no friends left. The moment I release that audit report, no lawyer in this city will touch you. I don't care, he shrieked, spittle flying from his lips. I will fight you. I will burn this whole building down before I let you take my company for $1. You are nothing. You are just a glorified carpenter. You are dirt. He was losing it completely. The mask of sanity had slipped. The primal, violent narcissist underneath was exposed. He lunged. It happened fast. He scrambled over the conference table, scattering the remaining pens and notepads. His eyes were wild, his hands reaching for my throat. He wanted to squeeze the life out of the man who had exposed him. You old bastard, he screamed, grabbing my lapels. I will kill you, Maya screamed. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I just looked at him with pity. Before his fingers could tighten around my neck, a massive hand clamped down on his shoulder. It was the head of security, a man named Titus, who had been standing silently by the door. Titus was 6'5" and built like a tank. He didn't say a word. He just pulled Braden off me as easily as a parent pulls a toddler off a toy. Braden flailed his legs, kicking in the air, screaming obscenities. Let me go, I will kill him. Titus slammed Braden back into his chair, pinning him there with one hand. Sit down, sir, Titus said, his voice a low rumble. Braden gasped for air, his expensive suit torn his tie askew. He looked wild, demonic. I stood up slowly, brushing off my jacket. I wasn't afraid. I was just disappointed. Violence is the last refuge of the incompetent Braden, I said. I walked over to where the contract had fallen. I picked it up. I walked back to him. You talk about suing me. You talk about fighting. But you are forgetting one thing. I leaned in close, my face inches from his. You are building on my water, Braden. And right now, it is starting to rain. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table, face up. It was connected to the live feed from the Georgia estate. Look, I said. On the screen, the sky over the mansion was dark. Rain was falling in sheets, torrents of water hammering the earth. It was a tropical storm moving up the coast. I didn't order the rain, I said, but I did design the drainage. And since you refuse to sign since you want to fight, I think it is time I stopped protecting you from the consequences of your own bad engineering. I tapped a button on the screen. The valve status changed from neutral to open. What did you do? Braden gasped, staring at the screen. I just pulled the firewood from under the pot. Son, I said, I opened the diversion valve, the water that was holding your house up, the pressure you relied on. It is gone. The aquifer is draining. Braden watched in horror as the camera shook. The ground in the video seemed to shudder. Now you can sue me, I said, but you better hurry, because in about an hour you won't have a house to serve the papers to sign the paper, Braden, I said, pointing to the contract, or watch your life wash away. He looked at the screen. He looked at the dollar bill. I placed back on the table. The fight went out of him. He realized he wasn't fighting a man. He was fighting nature, and nature always wins. The sky turned a bruised purple over Georgia 2 days after I left Chicago. It was the kind of color that makes birds stop singing and makes the hair on your arms stand up. I stood on the edge of lot number 4, my boots planted firmly in the soil I had tested and treated. The ground beneath me was solid. It was reinforced with the chemical compound I had invented. It was anchored by the deep roots of the pines I had refused to cut down. But 50 yards away across the property line, the world was a different story. It started with the rain. It wasn't a gentle shower. It was a deluge. A tropical depression had stalled over the county, dumping 6 inches of water in 12 hours. To a normal house built on a proper foundation, this would have been an inconvenience. To Braden's estate built on a capped aquifer and liquefying clay, it was a death sentence. I watched from under the brim of my hat. The rain was coming down in sheets, looking like gray curtains sweeping across the valley Braden had hired. A crew of desperate laborers. They were running around the perimeter of the mansion stacking sandbags trying to divert the water. But they were trying to stop a hemorrhage with a Band-Aid. They were fighting surface water, but the real enemy was underground. You see, when I opened the valve in Chicago, I drained the pressure that was artificially holding up the hill. The water table dropped. The clay, which had been saturated for 7 years, suddenly had nothing to support it. And then the fresh rain came pouring down, turning the topsoil into a heavy, wet soup. Gravity took over. It started with a sound. It wasn't a crash. Not yet. It was a low, mournful groan that seemed to come from the belly of the earth. It sounded like a whale dying. It was the sound of steel rebar stretching beyond its yield point. The workers stopped stacking sandbags. They looked at each other, eyes wide, and backed away. Then came the pop. It sounded like a gunshot, a loud, sharp crack that echoed off the valley walls. I saw a window on the second floor of the mansion suddenly shatter. The glass exploded outward, showering the patio below with diamond shards. The frame had twisted. The house was moving. Braden ran out of the back door. He was wearing a yellow raincoat, screaming at the workers. "Don't stop!" he yelled, waving his arms like a conductor of chaos. "Keep stacking. Put the bags against the north wall. Shore it up, sir," the foreman shouted back, backing away toward the driveway. "It is not the wall. It is the ground. The ground is leaving." I watched as a fissure appeared in the manicured lawn. It started near the garage, the very garage Braden had built over the water veins 7 years ago. The crack zigzagged across the grass like a black snake moving fast. It tore through the flower beds. It ripped through the expensive irrigation system, sending geysers of water shooting into the air, adding to the flood. Then the garage moved. It didn't collapse. It slid. It was a slow, sickening motion. The entire concrete slab which Braden had poured in a rush, detached from the main house. The driveway buckled, pushing upward into a jagged tent of asphalt. The garage tilted 10 degrees, then 20. I heard the screech of metal as the luxury cars inside slammed against the garage doors. The yellow Lamborghini, the symbol of his vanity, was being crushed by the weight of its own shelter. Braden screamed, "No, no, my cars!" He started to run toward the garage, but the ground lurched again, throwing him to his knees. He crawled in the mud, his yellow raincoat smeared with the brown slurry that used to be his lawn. Then the main house began to scream. If you have never heard a house break, be grateful. It is a sound that stays with you. It is the sound of tension releasing all at once. The massive timber beams inside the walls snapped with sounds like cannon fire. The dry wall ripped apart, sounding like a giant sheet of paper being torn. I saw the crack run up the brick facade of the mansion. It started at the foundation and raced up to the roofline, in a split second separating the master bedroom from the library. The chimney crumbled, bricks tumbling down and crashing through the roof of the sunroom. The house was splitting in two. The north side, the side sitting on the compromised clay, was sliding down the hill. The south side, anchored to slightly better rock, was trying to stay put. The result was a violent tearing. The Italian marble foyer, the one where Braden had yelled at me for dropping dirt, was being pulled apart. I imagined that white stone cracking jagged lines, ruining its perfection. Braden was on his knees in the mud, watching his empire disintegrate. He was screaming, but the sound of the rain and the dying house drowned him out. He looked small. He looked powerless. He looked like a child watching his sandcastle get washed away by the tide. A police cruiser and a fire truck pulled up to the main gate, their sirens wailing, but they stopped at the entrance. The emergency responders knew better than to drive onto unstable ground. They stood by their trucks, lights flashing, watching the spectacle. I walked slowly to the property line. There was a small wire fence separating my land from his. I stopped there. I didn't cross over. My land was dry. My land was stable. I was standing on the ark, watching the flood. Braden saw me. He looked up from the mud, wiping the sludge from his eyes. He saw me standing there, dry and calm. "Help me," he shrieked. His voice was raw, shredded. "Help me shore it up. Let me bring the equipment onto your land. If we anchor it from your side, we can stop the slide. We can save the shell." I looked at the cracking mansion. I looked at the garage that was now halfway down the ravine. I looked at the man who had called me trash. I shook my head slowly. "I told you, Braden," I shouted over the roar of the rain. "You cannot anchor a lie to the truth. My land is solid because I respected it. Your land is moving because you abused it. I will not let you drag my property down with yours. But it is falling," he screamed. "It is worth $10 million. "It is worth nothing," I said. "It is a pile of bricks on a slide." As if to punctuate my sentence, a massive section of the roof gave way. The clay tiles cascaded down, crashing onto the patio. The chandelier in the main hallway, the crystal fixture that had cost more than my truck, fell. I heard it crash. A tinkling, delicate sound amidst the roar of destruction. The house groaned one last time and settled. It didn't fall completely flat. It stopped listing at a crazy 45-degree angle, broken, twisted, and ruined. It looked like a ship that had run aground on the rocks. The front door was hanging off its hinges. The windows were jagged maws. The pride of coal luxury living was now a condemned wreck. The rain kept falling, washing the mud over the expensive pavers, burying the landscaping, erasing the footprints of the parties and the arrogance. Braden sat in the mud, staring at the ruin. He didn't move. He didn't scream anymore. He just stared. He was soaking wet, shivering, covered in the very dirt he had always despised. I turned away. I walked back toward my truck, which was parked on the solid gravel of lot number 4. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. Destruction is not a happy thing, even when it is deserved. It is a waste of materials, a waste of labor, a waste of potential. But it was necessary. I climbed into my truck and turned on the wipers. I watched the rain clear a path on the glass. The house was gone. The symbol was broken. Braden Cole was homeless, not because he didn't have a roof, but because he had never built a foundation. I put the truck in gear and drove away, leaving him in the rain with the wreckage of his ego. The earth had spoken, and it had said, "Enough." The silence that falls over a disaster site is heavy. It is a thick, suffocating blanket that covers the wreckage. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a sky that was a piercing, indifferent blue. The sun beat down on the twisted remains of what used to be the Cole estate, illuminating every crack, every broken window, and every failure. Within hours of the collapse, the vultures descended. Not the birds, but the bureaucrats. City inspectors in hard hats that looked too clean for the mud swarmed the property. They carried clipboards and cameras, their faces grim. They didn't see a home, they saw a liability. They taped a bright orange placard to the front door. The adhesive wouldn't stick to the wet wood, so they stapled it. The sound of the staple gun echoed like a gavel striking a desk. Condemned, unlawful to occupy. That sticker was the end of Braden's reign. It was a legal seal on a physical reality. The house was not safe. The ground was still moving, slowly, shifting inches every hour, threatening to slide the rest of the structure into the ravine. The city cut the power. The water company shut off the main. Not that it mattered, since the pipes were already sheared in half. Then came the bank. Banks are funny creatures. They will lend you an umbrella when the sun is shining, but the second it starts to rain, they want it back. And when your house snaps in half, they don't just want the umbrella, they want your blood. Braden had leveraged this property to the hilt. He owed millions. The moment the condemnation order was filed, the automated systems at the bank flagged the asset as toxic. They called the note. Braden didn't have the money. He didn't even have a working phone charger. His was buried somewhere in the rubble of his study. So the bank moved fast. They triggered the foreclosure clause, immediately seizing the property to stop their losses. They wanted to auction off the debt to get it off their books before the end of the quarter. That is where I came in. I didn't go to the house first. I went to the bank downtown. I walked into the asset management division wearing my charcoal suit, carrying the briefcase that held my legacy. The banker, a young man named Mr. Henderson, looked tired. He had been dealing with the coal fallout all morning. "Mr. Henderson," I said, sitting down across from him, "I understand you are holding a distressed note on the property at 4400 River Road." Henderson sighed, rubbing his temples. "It is a total loss." "Mr. Robinson, the land is unstable. The structure is a write-off. We are looking at a 7-figure loss. We are preparing to list it as a junk asset, just to recoup something, anything." "I don't want you to list it." I said, "I want to buy the note." Henderson looked up, surprised. "You want to buy the debt? You know the house is condemned, right? You can't live there." "I don't want to live there," I said calmly. "I want to own the paper. I want to be the one who decides when the eviction happens. I want to be the bank." I slid a cashier's check across the desk. It was for the full amount of the distressed value pennies on the dollar compared to what Braden had borrowed, but still a significant sum. Henderson looked at the check. He looked at me. He didn't ask why. He didn't care. He just saw a way to save his career and get a bad loan off his ledger. He pushed the paperwork toward me. "Sign here, Mr. Robinson, and here. Congratulations. You are now the primary lien holder. You own the mortgage. You own the foreclosure rights. Effectively, you own the property. I signed my name, Ezekiel Robinson." The pen moved smoothly across the paper. It felt different than the signature I had given 7 years ago. That signature had been a surrender. This signature was a conquest. I left the bank with the deed in my hand. I walked to my truck. I placed the folder on the passenger seat. I patted it gently. "Let's go for a ride," I said to the empty cab. I drove back to the estate. The drive felt shorter this time. When I arrived, the scene was chaotic. A police cruiser was parked sideways, blocking the main gate. The lights were flashing red and blue, reflecting off the puddles of mud. I pulled up to the barricade. A young officer stepped out, holding up his hand. "Turn around, sir," he said. "This is a restricted area. The structure is unstable. No spectators." I rolled down my window. "I am not a spectator, son," I said. "I am the owner." I handed him the paperwork. The officer looked at it, frowning. He radioed his sergeant. While he checked my credentials, I looked past him. Up the driveway, I could see Braden. He was standing on the front porch, or what was left of it. He was screaming at 2 other officers. He was wearing the same mud-stained suit from 2 days ago. He looked wild, feral. He was holding a trash bag, clutching it to his chest. "This is my house," Braden screamed, his voice cracking. "You can't make me leave. I have rights. I need to get my things. My computer is in there. My watch collection." "Sir," one of the officers said, stepping forward. "You have to step off the porch. The structural engineer says the roof could collapse at any moment. It is for your safety." "I don't care about safety," Braden yelled, shoving the officer back. "I care about my property. Get off my land." The officer at the gate handed me back my papers. He looked at me with a new respect. "You are clear, Mr. Robinson. The sergeant is up there dealing with the occupant. Do you want us to handle this?" I opened the truck door and stepped out. My boots crunched on the gravel. "No," I said. I will handle it. I walked up the driveway. It was a long walk. The once manicured lawns were now a swamp of mud and debris. The fountain was tipped over. I saw the shattered remains of the Japanese maple I had brought 7 years ago. The trunk was still there, twisted and dead, half buried in the silt. I reached the top of the driveway. Braden saw me. He froze. The trash bag slipped from his hand. "You," he hissed. "You did this. You called the city, didn't you? You sent the inspectors." I didn't answer. I walked past the police officers who parted to let me through. I stood at the bottom of the porch steps looking up at him. The house groaned behind him. A piece of gutter detached and fell with a clang. "Braden," I said, my voice calm but carrying over the wind. "I just came from the bank." Braden's eyes widened. "The bank, they are working with me. I told them I just need a week, I can restructure. The bank sold the note, Braden. I said I bought it." Braden shook his head, backing up until his back hit the condemned door. "No, that is impossible. You can't buy the note." I pulled the deed from my jacket pocket. I held it up. "It is done. I own the mortgage. I own the debt. And since you have defaulted on your payments and the property is condemned, I am exercising my right as the lien holder." I pointed to the ground. "You are trespassing." Braden laughed a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "Trespassing. This is my house. I built this. You built nothing." I roared, my patience finally snapping. "You borrowed money to pay men to build a facade on top of a swamp, and now the rent is due." I turned to the police sergeant officer. "This man is trespassing on my property. He is creating a public safety hazard. I would like him removed." The sergeant nodded. He had been waiting for this. He was tired of Braden's screaming, tired of being abused by a man who thought he was above the law. "Mr. Cole," the sergeant said, putting a hand on his holster, "you need to come with us now, or we will arrest you for disorderly conduct and trespassing." Braden looked at the sergeant, then at me. He looked at the house that was literally falling down around his ears. He looked at the wreckage of his life. "No," he whispered. "No." He tried to run back into the house. He grabbed the handle of the front door, shaking it violently. "My things, my life. It is all in there." The sergeant moved fast. He grabbed Braden by the arm and spun him around. Braden took a swing. It was a weak, flailing punch, but it was enough. "That's it," the sergeant yelled. He swept Braden's legs. Braden hit the muddy porch with a thud. The sergeant wrestled his arms behind his back. I heard the click of handcuffs. Braden screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of a man whose ego was being amputated. He was hauled to his feet. Mud covered his face. His expensive suit was ruined. He looked at me, his eyes filled with hate and tears. "You promised," he shouted. "You said I could walk away. You said I got $1." I walked up the steps until I was eye level with him. "I offered you a deal in the boardroom, Braden. I offered to let you walk away with dignity if you signed the paper, but you refused. You chose to fight nature. You chose to fight me. And when you fight the earth, you lose." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the $1 bill I had tried to give him days ago. I tucked it into the breast pocket of his muddy jacket. "You still get the $1, I said, "because I am a man of my word even if you aren't. Take him away, Sergeant." The officers marched him down the steps. He was kicking and sobbing, dragging his feet, leaving long furrows in the mud. He was hauled toward the squad car, stuffed into the back seat like a common criminal. I stood on the porch of the ruined house. I looked out over the valley. The rain had stopped. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the broken land. I was the owner of a pile of rubble. I was the master of a disaster. But as I watched the police car, drive-away lights flashing, fading into the distance, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The land was mine again. It was broken. Yes, it was scarred, but it was mine, and I knew how to fix broken things. I turned and looked at the house. I didn't see a mansion. I saw raw materials. I saw wood that could be salvaged. I saw stone that could be repurposed. I saw the potential for something new, something humble, something real. I took a deep breath of the cool air. "It is time to clean up," I whispered. I walked down the steps and headed toward my truck. My work was just beginning, but for the first time in 7 years, I was ready to get my hands dirty. The sun had gone down hours ago, leaving the street bathed in the sickly orange glow of the sodium streetlights. It was quiet. The police cruisers had driven away their sirens, fading into the distance like the wail of a dying animal. The news vans had packed up their cameras once they got their footage of the ruined mansion. The spectacle was over and the audience had gone home, leaving only the wreckage behind. I stood inside the main gate. The iron bars were cold against my hands. This was the same gate Braden had installed 7 years ago to keep people like me out. He had wanted an imposing entrance, something that screamed exclusivity. It was 12 feet of black steel tipped with gold spikes. It was a fortress gate designed to protect a king. But tonight, the king was on the outside. I watched him walk up the street. He had been released from the precinct, probably on his own, recognizance pending the arraignment. He had no car. His Lamborghini was crushed inside the collapsed garage. He had no phone. It was buried in the mud somewhere in his study, and he had no home. He was walking slowly, dragging his feet. The mud on his expensive suit had dried into a stiff gray crust, flaking off with every step. He wasn't wearing his shoes, he was in his socks, having lost his loafers in the muck when the police dragged him away. He looked like a refugee from a war zone, but the war he had fought was entirely in his own head. He stopped at the gate. He gripped the bars, his hands shaking. He looked through the metal at me standing on the driveway. He was holding 2 black plastic trash bags, one in each hand. I looked at those bags. A dark sense of irony settled in my chest, heavy and cold. 7 years ago, I had walked down this same driveway carrying a duffel bag while he shouted at me to take my trash with me. Now here he was, holding his entire life in a hefty bag. "Ezekiel," he rasped. His voice was gone shredded from hours of screaming. It was a broken whisper. "Let me in," he said. "It is cold out here." Didn't move. I didn't reach for the keypad to open the gate. I just stood there, my boots planted firmly on the gravel, looking at the man who had tried to erase me. "Go away, Braden," I said softly. "The property is condemned. It is unsafe, and you are trespassing. Please," he begged, leaning his forehead against the cold bars. "I have nowhere to go." The bank froze my cards. Maya won't answer the hotel phone, I think. I think she left me. I have nothing, Ezekiel. Just these bags. The police let me take some clothes from the trunk of the squad car before they towed it. That is it. That is all I have. He lifted the trash bags slightly as if to show me his inventory. A few shirts, a pair of gym shorts, maybe a toothbrush. It was a pathetic collection for a master of the universe. I looked at him, and for a fleeting second I felt pity. It is in my nature. I am a builder. I fix things. I protect things. When I see something broken, my instinct is to repair it. But then I remembered the Japanese maple. I remembered the sound of the pot shattering on the driveway. I remembered the look in his eyes when he told me I smelled like a grave. Pity is a dangerous thing when you give it to a wolf. It just gives them time to bite you again. I walked closer to the gate until I was only a few inches away from him, separated by the iron bars. "You are holding trash bags, Braden," I said. He looked down at his hands, confused. "Yeah, so what do?" "So, you remember what you told me 7 years ago?" I asked. "Do you remember standing on that porch right up there on the hill before it slid into the ravine? Do you remember what you screamed at me while your friends laughed and drank champagne?" Braden closed his eyes. He remembered. He couldn't forget. "You told me to take my trash and get out," I reminded him. "You told me this place wasn't for worthless people. You said I was a stain." I gripped the bars, my knuckles turning white. "You were right, Braden." He looked up, startled. You think I was right?" "Yes," I said. "You were right. This place, this land, this earth, it is not for worthless people. It rejects them. It spits them out. That is why the ground moved, Braden. That is why the house fell. The land knew you didn't belong here." Braden's face twisted in anger, a flash of his old arrogance cutting through the misery. "I am not worthless," he hissed. "I was a CEO. I managed millions of dollars. I built a brand. I had value." I shook my head slowly. "No, son. You had price. There is a difference." I leaned in closer, looking deep into his bloodshot eyes. "You and I, we have different definitions of value, Braden. To you, value is what you can extract. You look at a tree and you see lumber. You look at the ground and you see real estate. You look at a person and you see what they can give you. You are a miner, Braden. You dig, you take. You hollow things out until they collapse, and then you move on to the next hole." I pointed to the ruined house behind me, a dark silhouette against the moon. "You hollowed out this land. You blocked the water. You ignored the soil. You cut corners to save a dime. And then you hollowed out my daughter. You took her spirit. You took her credit. You took her joy. You extracted everything until she was just a shell. And you tried to do it to me. Braden pulled back, slightly stung by the truth. But real value. I continued, my voice rising in the night air. Real value isn't what you take. It is what you create. It is what you build. It is what you leave behind, that stands after you are gone. I held up my hands, my calloused, scarred hands in the moonlight. I build Braden. I take raw earth and I make it safe. I take broken wood and I make it strong. I plant trees that I will never sit under. I create foundations that hold up the world. That is value. Value is service. Value is production. Value is leaving the place better than you found it. I looked at the trash bags in his hands. You have spent 39 years on this earth, Braden, and what have you built? Nothing. You moved money from one pile to another. You moved words around on a contract. You moved people like chess pieces, but you never created a single tangible thing. And now that the money is gone and the words are lies and the people have left you, look at what remains. I nodded at the bags. 2 bags of used clothes. That is the sum total of your life's work. That is your legacy. Braden stared at the bags. He dropped them. The plastic tore on the gravel, spilling a silk tie onto the dirty road. It isn't fair, he whispered, tears streaming down his face again. It isn't fair. You have everything. You have the money, you have the land, you have the company. You won. Why do you have to kick me when I am down? Because you need to feel the ground, Braden, I said. I unlocked the small pedestrian gate, just a crack. Braden's eyes lit up. He thought I was letting him in. He thought I was breaking. He stepped forward, reaching for the handle, but I blocked the opening with my body. I wasn't letting him in. I was stepping out. I stepped onto the street, standing next to him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a card. It was a business card, plain white with black text. I am not going to give you a room, Braden. I am not going to give you money, and I am certainly not going to give you my daughter back. I handed him the card. This is the address of a shelter in downtown Atlanta. I built it 3 years ago. It has a strong foundation. The roof doesn't leak. It is warm. They serve a hot meal at 6 a.m. Braden looked at the card with disgust. A shelter. You want me to go to a homeless shelter? I want you to start over, I said. I want you to understand what it feels like to start from zero, because that is where you are. Zero, you are at the bottom of the pit. You dug. I turned back to the gate. I stepped inside and locked it behind me. The click of the heavy deadbolt was final. It was the sound of a book closing. Ezekiel Braden shouted, grabbing the bars again. Don't leave me here. It is night. I am afraid. I looked at him one last time. Fear is good, Braden. Fear makes you pay attention. Fear teaches you to respect the storm. I started walking up the driveway toward the darkness of the property, toward the spot where I would park my truck and sleep for the first time in 7 years on my own land. But I didn't finish the job. Did I? Braden yelled after me. You forgot one thing. You forgot the trash. He kicked the bags he had dropped. You forgot the trash. I stopped. I didn't turn around. I just called back over my shoulder, my voice carrying through the cool night air. I didn't forget it, Braden. The trash is outside the gate, right where it belongs. I kept walking. I heard him scream a wordless howl of rage and impotence that faded into the night silence. I didn't look back. I walked up the hill, past the broken fountain, past the ruined garage. I walked to the spot where the guest cottage used to stand. It was just a muddy pit now filled with water, the very water that had brought down the house. I stood at the edge of the pit. I looked down at the dark water reflecting the stars. You were right, Braden, I whispered to the silence. You were right. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small shard of the clay pot I had kept for 7 years, the piece of the pot that held the Japanese maple. I tossed it into the water. It made a small splash and sank. The debt is paid, I said. I walked back to my truck. I climbed in and locked the doors. I reclined. The seat I was sleeping in a truck again, just like that first night. But this time I wasn't homeless. This time I was home, and tomorrow I had work to do. There was a mess to clean up, and unlike Braden, I wasn't afraid of getting my hands dirty. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 7 years, I slept without dreaming of revenge. The rain had stopped, but the mud was still deep when I pulled my truck into the parking lot of the Starlight Motel on the edge of town. It was a cheap place, the kind of place where the neon sign flickered and the sheets smelled of stale cigarettes and regret. This was where Maya had ended up. After Braden was arrested, after the bank seized the account, she had nowhere else to go. Her friends, the ones who drank her wine and swam in her pool, had stopped answering her calls the moment the news of the scandal broke. Wealth attracts parasites, but poverty is the ultimate repellent. I walked to room number 12 and knocked. The door opened slowly. Maya stood there wearing jeans and a t-shirt, her face scrubbed clean of makeup, holding my grandson Leo on her hip. Sarah was clinging to her leg, looking at me with big, scared eyes. Grandpa Leo whispered, reaching out his chubby arms. I took him, holding him close, smelling the baby shampoo and the fear. I looked at Maya. She looked exhausted. She looked broken. But for the first time in years, she looked real. "Pack your things, Maya," I said. "We are leaving." She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Thank you, Daddy. I didn't know if you would come." I didn't answer. I just carried the boy to the truck. I helped them load their few bags. The drive was quiet. The kids fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the chaos of the last few days. Maya stared out the window, watching the familiar streets roll by. "Where are we going?" she asked softly. "Are we going to a hotel?" "No," I said. "Are we going to your apartment in Chicago?" "No." She looked at me, confused. "Then, where, Daddy?" "We are going to work," I said. I drove them to the new site. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a luxury condo. It was an old warehouse on the industrial side of town that I had bought to serve as the headquarters for the restoration project of the estate. It was a massive brick building filled with lumber tools and the smell of sawdust. I had set up a small living quarters in the back, simple, clean, and safe. I parked the truck inside the bay doors. "This is home for now," I said. "Get the kids settled in the back. There is a kitchen, a bathroom, and bunk beds. It isn't the Ritz, but it is dry, and nobody can kick you out." Maya looked around at the stacks of timber and the bags of cement. She looked terrified. "Daddy, I can't live here." "It is a workshop. It is a sanctuary," I corrected. "And it is free. But the food, the clothes, the diapers, you are going to have to earn those." I walked over to a workbench in the center of the room. On it lay a stack of old reclaimed oak beams. They were black with age, covered in grit and old varnish. They looked ugly, rough, and useless. I pointed to them. "Do you know what this is?" "Maya," she shook her head. "Wood. It is heart pine," I said. "Salvage from a barn that fell down in 1890. It is the strongest wood in the world, but right now it looks like trash because nobody has taken the time to clean it." I picked up a sanding block, a heavy wooden block wrapped in coarse grit sandpaper. I held it out to her. Maya stared at it. "Daddy, what are you doing?" "I am offering you a job," I said. "You need money. You need to feed your children. And I need these beams sanded down to the raw grain so we can use them to rebuild the floor of the main house." Maya recoiled, stepping back as if the sandpaper were a snake. You want me to sand wood?" She laughed, a brittle, hysterical sound. "Daddy, I have a degree in art history. I was the vice president of the Charity League. I can't sand wood." My hands... I grabbed her hand. It was soft, manicured. The nails were painted a pale pink. "Your hands are weak." "Maya," I said, my voice hard. She tried to pull away, but I held on. 7 years ago, I stood in your hallway and your husband threw me out like garbage. He called me worthless, and you stood there. You watched. You heard him insult the man who raised you, the man who sacrificed everything for you. And you said nothing. Maya looked down, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "I was scared, Daddy. I know," I said, softening my grip, but not letting go. "Fear makes us silent. But silence is expensive, Maya. You paid for your silence with your dignity. You let him speak for you. You let him think for you. You let him sign your name to debts that destroyed your life." I let go of her hand. "You lost your voice, Maya. And the only way to get it back is through your hands." I slammed the sanding block onto the timber. "You want to eat. You sand. You want to buy shoes for Sarah. You sand. You want to remember who you are before you were Mrs. Braden Cole. You sand until your arms burn and your fingers bleed and you find the woman who used to live inside you. I turned and walked away toward my office. I didn't look back. I knew this was the hardest thing I had ever done. It would have been easy to give her money. I had millions. I could have set her up in a condo and let her drift. But that would have been the cruelty of a parent who wants to be liked rather than respected. I didn't want a dependent. I wanted a daughter. I sat in my office and watched her through the glass partition. For the first hour, she just stood there staring at the wood. She cried. She paced. She picked up her phone. Probably to call Braden before remembering he was in a holding cell. Probably to call a friend before remembering she had none. Then she looked at the back room where her children were sleeping. She looked at the sanding block. Slowly, painfully, she picked it up. She touched the wood gingerly. She took a swipe. It was weak, ineffectual. Harder. She whispered to myself, "Put your back into it, girl." She swiped again. A cloud of dust rose up. She coughed, waving it away. She looked at her clothes, her jeans getting dusty. She looked angry. Good, I thought. Use the anger. She started to scrub. The sound of the sandpaper on the wood echoed through the warehouse. Shh, shh, shh. It was the sound of friction. It was the sound of resistance. I watched her for 3 days. She hated me. She wouldn't speak to me during the breaks. She ate her sandwich in silence, staring at the wall. Her hands blistered. The blisters broke and bled. She taped them up and kept going. Her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Her hair became a mess of tangles and sawdust. But the wood was changing. The black grime was peeling away. Underneath the rich amber grain of the heart, pine was starting to shine through. It was beautiful. Tight-grained and indestructible. It just needed someone to reveal it. On Friday afternoon, I walked out to her station. She was finishing the last beam. She was covered in sweat sawdust, coating her arms like a second skin. She didn't look like a socialite anymore. She looked like a worker. I stood there and watched her finish the stroke. She put the block down and wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt. "It is done," she said, her voice raspy. She didn't look for my approval. She just stated a fact. I ran my hand over the beam. It was smooth, warm, and alive. "It is good work, Maya," I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out an envelope. Inside was cash, her wages. Calculated at $20 an hour. It wasn't a fortune, but it was fair. "Here," I said. "This is yours." She took the envelope. She opened it, counting the bills. Her hands were rough now. The nails broken the skin dry. $320, she said. I nodded. "It is enough for groceries. It is enough for diapers. And it is enough to open a savings account in your own name." Maya looked at the money. Then she looked at the wood she had restored. Then she looked at me. For the first time in 7 years, her eyes were clear. The fog of luxury, the haze of being Braden's trophy wife, was gone. "I earned this," she whispered. "You did," I said. "And nobody can take it from you. Braden can't sue you for it. The bank can't foreclose on it. It is yours." She clutched the money to her chest and started to cry. But these weren't the tears of a victim. They were the tears of relief. "Daddy," she said, looking at her ruined hands, "they hurt." "I know, baby," I said, taking her rough hand in mine and kissing the knuckles. "Pain tells you that you are alive, and calluses, they are just protection. They mean you can handle the friction of the world without breaking." She hugged me. Then, it was a fierce, strong hug. The hug of a woman who knows her own strength. She smelled of sweat and pine and sawdust. It was the best smell in the world. "I am sorry I didn't speak up, Daddy," she whispered into my shoulder. "I was so weak. You were never weak." "Maya," I said, stroking her dusty hair. "You were just asleep. And now you are awake." I pulled back and looked at her. "Tomorrow we start on the framing. You are going to learn how to swing a hammer, because we have a house to rebuild. And I can't do it alone." She nodded, wiping her face, smiling through the grime. "I will be here," she said. I watched her walk back to the living quarters to show her children what she had earned. I watched her walk with a new stride. Her head was up, her shoulders were back. Braden had tried to bury her just like he tried to bury the water. But he forgot that water always finds a way to the surface, and he forgot that my daughter was cut from the same cloth as me. She wasn't marble, she wasn't glass, she was heart, pine, tough, resilient, and ready to bear the weight of a new life. I turned off the lights in the warehouse, leaving only the security lamps glowing. The stack of restored wood shone in the dim light. We were just getting started. It took 2 years to finish the restoration of the estate, but it wasn't a restoration in the way Braden would have understood. We didn't restore the gold leaf on the crown molding. We didn't polish the marble floors until they looked like ice. We didn't bring in exotic plants that couldn't survive the Georgia climate. Instead, we stripped the house down to its bones. We exposed the brick. We pulled up the rotting carpet and laid down the heart pine beams that Maya and I had sanded by hand. We turned the ballroom into a workshop. We turned the library into a drafting room. And we turned the servants' quarters into dormitories. The sign on the front gate didn't say Cole Luxury Living anymore. We melted those iron letters down and used the metal to reinforce the new gate. The new sign was carved from solid oak, simple and unpretentious. It read, "The Robinson Institute of Trade and Craft." It was a school, a place for kids who were like I used to be. Kids with calloused hands and empty pockets, but heads full of dreams. Kids who had been told by society that they were worthless because they didn't want to sit in a cubicle. I hired Marcus to teach architecture. I hired retired electricians, plumbers, and masons to pass on their skills. And I hired Maya to run the administration. She didn't wear designer dresses anymore. She wore jeans and work boots. And she commanded respect not because of her last name, but because she showed up early and stayed late. I stood on the balcony of what used to be the master bedroom looking down at the lawn. The grass was green again. The drainage system I had installed was working perfectly, feeding the soil instead of drowning it. Below me, I saw a group of 20 teenagers learning how to frame a wall. They were laughing, they were sweating, and they were learning the most important lesson of all, that you can build your own future if you are willing to do the work. Maya walked out onto the balcony, handing me a cup of coffee. "They are good kids," she said, watching them. One of them, Leo, the tall one, asked me if he could come in on Saturday to practice his joinery. I smiled, sipping the coffee. "Let him come," I said, "and give him a key. Responsibility is the best teacher." Maya leaned her head on my shoulder. She looked healthy. Her face had filled out, the gaunt look of fear was gone. She had her own bank account now, her own life. She was no longer a reflection of a man. She was her own woman. "We did it, Daddy," she whispered. "We fixed it." "We didn't just fix it, Maya," I said. "We gave it a purpose. A house without a purpose is just a pile of rocks. But this is a legacy." I finished my coffee and set the cup on the railing. "I have to go into town," I said. "I need to pick up some supplies for the welding class." I walked down to the driveway. My old Ford truck was parked there next to the shiny new vans we had bought for the school. I chose the Ford. I always chose the Ford. It had 200,000 miles on it, but the engine purred like a kitten because I took care of it. Drove into town, enjoying the late afternoon sun. The windows were down and the air smelled of honeysuckle and diesel. It was the smell of freedom. I stopped at a red light on the corner of Main and 4th Street. To my right was a used car lot, the kind of place with string lights flapping in the wind and inflated gorillas dancing on the roof. The sign said, "Bargain Motors. Bad credit. No problem." I glanced over idly, watching the salesman sharking around the lot looking for victims. And then I saw him. He was standing near a faded red sedan, holding a spray bottle and a rag. He was wearing a cheap polyester suit that didn't fit right, the pants too short, the jacket too tight across the shoulders. His hair was thinning, no longer dyed, and he looked tired. He looked 20 years older than his age. It was Braden. The light was still red, so I watched. A heavy-set man in a short-sleeved dress shirt stormed out of the sales office. He was pointing at the ground, screaming. I couldn't hear the words through the glass, but I could read the body language. The boss was pointing at a muddy footprint on the showroom tile. Braden's footprint. Braden looked down at his shoes. He looked defeated. He nodded quickly, mouthing the words, "I am sorry, boss. I will clean it up." He dropped to his knees right there on the pavement. He took the rag from his pocket and started scrubbing the tire of the sedan, trying to make it shine, trying to cover up the rust. The boss stood over him, yelling, waving a clipboard. It was the perfect mirror image. 7 years ago, Braden had stood over me screaming about dirt on his floor, calling me trash. Now he was the one on his knees trying to wipe away the grime, desperate to keep a job that paid him peanuts. He looked up, then sensing eyes on him. Our gazes locked across the intersection. I didn't smile in triumph. I didn't rev my engine. I didn't yell an insult. I just looked at him with a calm, steady gaze. I saw the recognition in his eyes. I saw the shame wash over him. He stopped, scrubbing. He just knelt there, holding a dirty rag, looking at the man he had tried to destroy. He saw the Ford truck. He saw my arm resting comfortably on the doorframe. He saw the peace on my face. For a moment, I thought he might come over. I thought he might try to beg or scream or blame me again, but he didn't. He just looked down, breaking eye contact, unable to bear the weight of his own reality. He went back to scrubbing the tire, disappearing into the role he had carved for himself. The light turned green. I didn't look back. I eased the truck into gear and pulled away, leaving Bargain Motors behind. I drove west toward the setting sun. The sky was a brilliant canvas of orange and purple streaks of fire painting the horizon. The road ahead was open. I thought about the school. I thought about Maya. I thought about the grandkids coming to visit next week. I thought about the feel of wood grain under my fingertips. My hands were still dirty. They would always be dirty. But it was good dirt. It was good. The dirt of creation, not the dirt of decay. I turned on the radio. An old blues song filled the cab. I tapped my fingers on the steering wheel. I was 79 years old. I had lost a house and gained a home. I had lost a son-in-law and regained a daughter. I had been broken, and I had rebuilt. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized that Braden was wrong about one thing. The story doesn't end when you get kicked out of the castle. The story ends when you build a better one and leave the gate open for others. I smiled and drove on into the twilight. The engine hummed a steady rhythm carrying me home. Dignity is not found in a designer suit, and worth is not measured by the square footage of your home. My son-in-law mistook dirt on my hands for poverty, not realizing that soil is where all growth begins. He built his life on perception. I built mine on foundation. When the storms came, his castle of cards collapsed while my roots held firm. Never kick a man when he is down, especially if that man built the ground you are standing on. Be careful who you discard. They might just be the architect of your future. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us share more stories like this with the world. And I want to ask you a question. In your life, do you value the appearance of success or the foundation of hard work? Let me know in the comments below. Stay grounded, stay strong, and I will see you in the next video.